The Love We Forgot by Arisa. Chapter 1. A Life Half Remembered. The first thing Arden notices is the sound. A soft, rhythmic beeping somewhere to the left. Not loud, just persistent enough to keep time with the dull pulse in their skull. Beep. Pause. Beep. Arden opens their eyes. The ceiling above them is white. Not the soft, comfortable white of a bedroom ceiling, but the sterile kind, the color that exists only in hospitals and waiting rooms. The fluorescent light overhead hums faintly. Their throat feels dry. They try to swallow. It hurts. Something shifts beside the bed. Arden turns their head slowly, the movement sending a thin thread of pain down the back of their neck. A man sits in the chair beside them. He's leaning forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped. Broad shoulders, dark hair cut short. His posture is still in a way that feels practiced, like someone used to waiting. When he notices Arden is awake, his eyes lift. Deep brown, warm, relieved. "You're back," he says quietly. His voice is steady, calm, almost gentle. Not the overly cheerful tone doctors use when they think patients are fragile. Arden studies him. The strange thing is not that he's here. The strange thing is the look on his face, like someone who has been holding their breath for a long time. Arden opens their mouth. "What happened?" The words come out rough. The man shifts forward slightly, but doesn't reach for them. "Car accident," he says. 3 days ago." Arden blinks slowly. The words don't land. They float somewhere just outside comprehension, like hearing a sentence in a language that almost makes sense but not quite. "Am I okay?" The man nods once. "You're going to be." A doctor enters the room then, a tall person with silver-framed glasses and the careful composure of someone who spends a lot of time delivering complicated news. "Ah," the doctor says, noticing Arden's open eyes. "Welcome back." They check a monitor, shine a small light into Arden's pupils. "How are you feeling?" Arden thinks about the question. Their head hurts. Their body feels heavy. But the most unsettling thing isn't the pain. It's the emptiness. Arden hesitates. The doctor waits patiently. "I don't know." The doctor glances briefly toward the man sitting beside the bed. Then back to Arden. "Can you tell me your name?" The question lands strangely. Arden opens their mouth automatically. Nothing comes out. A long silence stretches. Arden searches their mind. For a name. A memory. Anything. But the inside of their head feels like an abandoned room. Walls intact, furniture gone. "I can't," they whisper. The doctor nods slowly, as if this confirms something expected. "That's all right." They jot something on a clipboard. "What about this?" They continue gently. "Do you know where you are?" Arden glances around the room. Hospital bed. Curtains. Monitors. "Hospital," they say. "Good." The doctor steps slightly aside, gesturing toward the man beside the bed. "Do you recognize him?" Arden turns again. The man hasn't moved. His expression hasn't changed either. Still calm, still quiet. But now there's something else there. A careful kind of distance. Arden studies his face. The curve of his jaw. The faint shadow under his eyes, like he hasn't slept well in days. Something about him feels important. But familiarity doesn't arrive. "No," Arden says softly. The word sits in the room like a dropped coin. The man exhales slowly through his nose. Not surprised, just accepting. The doctor folds their clipboard. "Your name is Arden Solis." Arden repeats it silently. "Arden." It feels like trying on someone else's coat. "And the person sitting beside you," the doctor continues, "is Julian Ibarra." Julia nods once, still not moving closer. "You've experienced a form of retrograde amnesia," the doctor explains. "Your brain likely suppressed a significant portion of your long-term memories after the trauma." Arden stares at them. "So I forgot everything?" "Not everything," the doctor says gently. "You still retain general knowledge and language. But your personal history, your autobiographical memory, appears to be largely inaccessible right now." Arden lets the words settle. Personal history. Gone. They glance again at Julian. Julian meets their eyes briefly, then looks down at his hands. There's something deeply unsettling about that. Like seeing someone react to a story you don't remember telling. "Will it come back?" Arden asks. "Possibly," the doctor says. "Memory recovery after trauma can be unpredictable. Sometimes it returns gradually. Sometimes certain memories remain inaccessible. The room falls quiet again. Arden becomes aware of Julian's presence in a new way. Not just that he's here, but how he's here. Not hovering, not speaking for them, just staying. The doctor continues. For now, the most important thing is rest and stability. Familiar environments and people can help the brain reconnect pathways. Julian's shoulders shift slightly at that. The doctor closes their clipboard. We'll check in again tomorrow. With that, they leave. The door closes softly behind them. Silence settles. Arden looks back at Julian. He still hasn't moved from the chair. How long have you been here? Arden asks. Julian shrugs one shoulder. A while. That's not a time. A faint ghost of a smile touches his mouth. 3 days. Arden frowns. You stayed the whole time? Mostly. Why? The question slips out before Arden can stop it. Julian doesn't look offended. He studies the floor for a moment. Then he says simply, you would have done the same. Arden searches his face, trying to see it, trying to feel something that explains the certainty in his voice. But nothing comes. That's strange, Arden says quietly. Julian glances up. Why? Because I don't remember you. Something flickers behind his eyes. Gone almost instantly. I know. Arden rubs their forehead carefully. The gesture feels oddly familiar. So what are we? Julian's eyebrows lift slightly. Friends. Arden clarifies. Family. Julian hesitates. Not long, but long enough that Arden notices. Something like that, he says. Something about the answer feels incomplete. But Arden is too tired to press further. Their eyes drift around the room. A small plastic cup on the bedside table. A folded sweater on the back of Julian's chair. A notebook tucked halfway into the pocket of Arden's hospital bag. Is that mine? Arden asks, pointing weakly toward the bag. Julian follows their gaze. Yeah. Do I write? Sometimes. Arden stares at the notebook. It feels like looking at evidence of someone else's life. Do you know what's in it? Julian shakes his head. You never let anyone read it. That surprises Arden. Why not? Julian leans back slightly in the chair. I think, he says carefully, you like keeping parts of yourself private. The sentence lands somewhere deep inside Arden. Not as a memory, but as a truth. They look at Julian again. You seem like you know me really well. Julian doesn't answer right away. His gaze moves to the window where the late afternoon light glows pale against the glass. I know the version of you that existed before the accident, he says quietly. Arden waits. But that person isn't exactly here right now. Arden absorbs that. A strange, hollow feeling opens in their chest. So, I'm different. Julian looks back at them. His voice stays calm. You're still you. How do you know? A long pause. Julian studies Arden's face like he's looking for something specific. Finally, he says, You asked that question before. Arden tilts their head. When? Months ago. What did you mean? Julian gives a small shrug. I don't remember the whole conversation. That's convenient. That makes him smile a little. The first real one. Probably. Arden studies him. Something about the smile feels important. Not familiar, but significant, like a door that almost opens. Then the exhaustion returns, heavy and unavoidable. Their eyes begin to close. Julian notices immediately. Get some sleep, he says softly. Arden hesitates, then asks one last question. Julian? Yeah. If I don't remember anything, what happens now? Julian doesn't answer right away. He looks down at the floor, then back at Arden, and something quiet settles into his expression, a kind of steady patience. We figure out, he says. Arden's eyes close fully this time. The steady beep of the monitor fills the room again, and Julian stays in the chair beside the bed, exactly where he's been the whole time, watching over someone who no longer remembers why. Chapter 2. The center that holds people together. The first thing Arden notices about the community center is that it is louder than a hospital and somehow less frightening. The building is old in a way that shows itself without apology. Paint lifts at the corners of the hallway trim. One of the front windows has a hairline crack caught in the sun like a vein. The radiator near the entrance hisses with an attitude that suggests it has outlived several better funding plans. And yet the place feels alive. Not polished, not orderly, alive. A corkboard by the door is layered with flyers pinned over older flyers. Support groups, mutual aid, hormone resources. A movie night someone has illustrated with stars in blue marker. A handwritten note in all caps asking whoever keeps stealing the good stapler to return it before Nadia loses what remains of her patience. Arden stops just inside the doorway. Their hand is still on the metal push bar behind them. For a second, they can't move. The space should mean something. It doesn't. Or maybe it does, in a way too deep and too blurred to name. A pressure at the base of their throat. A sense of standing at the edge of a language they used to speak fluently. You can breathe, Julian says behind them. His voice is quiet enough that it doesn't feel like an audience. Arden lets go of the door. Wasn't aware I'd stopped. You did. Do I always make a good impression in entryways? Julian shuts the door with one hand. Usually you judge the bulletin boards first. Arden glances sideways at him. And then you start fixing typos no one asked you to fix. That gets a reluctant huff of laughter out of them. It surprises them enough that they almost miss the woman coming down the hall. She moves with the speed of someone who is always busy and has accepted that everyone else should adjust accordingly. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, dark hair streaked with silver and pulled into a practical knot. She carries a cardboard box against one hip and a ring of keys that jingles with authority. There you are, she says. Not sentimental. Not fragile, just direct. Arden has no idea who she is, but the way she says it makes something inside them straighten instinctively. The woman takes them in quickly. The careful posture, the uncertainty they are trying and failing to hide. Her face softens only a fraction. You look terrible, she says. Arden blinks. Julian, beside them, says, Nadia. What? The woman replies. They do. That's not an insult. It's observational. She shifts the box higher. You're Arden. I'm Nadia. And I run this circus badly and with divine resentment. Arden stares for half a second, then says, that is somehow the most reassuring introduction I've had all week. Nadia snorts. Good. Then your sense of judgment survived. She jerks her chin toward the hallway. Come on. I'll show you around before Luca sees you and starts crying theatrically in the lobby. Luca cries theatrically. Arden asks. Julian opens his mouth. Nadia cuts in. At Olympic levels. She turns and expects them to follow. Arden does. The hallway opens into a wide, main room crowded with donated furniture that doesn't match, but somehow belongs together anyway. A faded green couch. Metal folding chairs stacked in the corner. Bookshelves bowed slightly in the middle from too many paperbacks. Mugs. Plants in various stages of survival. A table covered with half-sorted pamphlets and a bowl of cheap wrapped candies. Despite themselves, Arden smiles. Nadia catches it and mercifully looks away. She leads Arden past a kitchen area barely separated from the main room by a counter cluttered with mismatched mugs, sugar packets, and a coffee machine that looks one bad morning away from mutiny. The smell of burnt grounds lingers in the air. Something in Arden's chest pulls tight. The scent reaches somewhere beyond thought. For one strange second, they can almost feel themselves standing here before dawn, sleeves pushed up, listening to something boil, waiting for the room to fill. Then it's gone. Arden grips the edge of the counter. Nadia stops walking. Too much. Arden lets out a breath. I don't know. Maybe. It's just the coffee is bad enough to trigger memory. Nadia offers. That startles a laugh out of them. Maybe. Nadia nods once, accepting the answer without making it heavier than it is. You don't need to force anything. Let the place be a place first. Arden looks at her. There is no pity in her face. Only practicality, worn down into kindness by repetition. Did I work here? Arden asks. You did everything here, Nadia says. Officially, you coordinated outreach and support intake. Unofficially, you were the person half the building yelled for when the printer jammed, someone had a panic attack, or a 17-year-old needed help finding the binder closet without dying of embarrassment. Arden stares. That sounds exhausting. It was. Nadia shifts the box in her arms. You were very good at it. Before Arden can answer, the front door bangs open hard enough to rattle the glass. A voice carries down the hallway. Tell me they're here, or I swear to God, I'm going to become unbearable. Nadia closes her eyes briefly. Too late. A moment later, Luca appears. He is carrying 3 tote bags, wearing a denim jacket with enamel pins all over the collar, and already looks on the verge of an emotional event. He stops dead when he sees Arden. His mouth drops open. Then he puts a hand over his heart with enough drama to justify Nadia's warning. "Oh my God," he says. "You're upright." Arden blinks. "That's usually how I prefer to be perceived, yes." Luca makes a noise that is half laugh, half near sob, dumps the tote bags onto the nearest chair, and strides over like someone resisting the urge to physically tackle them. "I knew you'd still be sarcastic," he says. "I told Nadia. She said I was being optimistic in an annoying way." "I did say that," Nadia replies. Luca points at Arden. "See? Same face. Slightly haunted, but same face." Arden glances at Julian. "Is everyone here like this?" Julian straightens from the bookshelf. "No," he pauses. "Just the ones who like you." Luca gasps. That was almost affectionate. Write it down. Something warm and uncomfortable passes through Arden. These people know them. Not vaguely, not politely, in the easy, specific way that means there was once a life here dense with habit, and they are standing in the middle of it empty-handed. Luca's expression softens as he steps closer. Close enough to matter, not so close that Arden has to lean back. "It's really good to see you," he says, quieter now. No performance in it this time. Just truth. Arden doesn't know what to do with that. "Thanks," they say. The word feels insufficient, but Lucas seems to understand what they mean anyway. He nods once, briskly, like he's deciding not to make this harder. "Okay, great, wonderful. Since you're alive, I'm assigning you the thrilling task of telling me whether the new flyer font looks trustworthy or cult-adjacent." Nadia sighs. "No work. I said telling me, not doing it. No emotional ambushes either." Luca presses a hand to his chest. "Nadia, your opinion of me wounds. It's built on data." Arden laughs again before they can stop themselves. The sound hangs in the room. Small. Real. Julian looks over at them at the exact moment they look at him. He looks away first. That unsettles Arden more than if he had held the eye contact. They spend the next half hour moving slowly through the building. A counseling office with soft lamps and overwater plants. A supply closet stuffed with donated clothes and hygiene kits. A back room where folding tables are stacked against the wall beside event banners and bins of archive files. Everywhere they go, Nadia narrates just enough to keep Arden from feeling lost and never enough to make them feel managed. People drift in and out. A volunteer with a nose ring waves awkwardly from the copy room. Someone in a paint-splattered hoodie says, "Holy shit, hi," then immediately apologizes to Nadia for swearing in front of recovery. An older man delivering donated books squeezes Arden's shoulder and says, "Good to have you back, kid," like he has known them for years. Every interaction leaves the same bruise behind. You mattered here. You belonged here. And Arden cannot remember earning either. By late afternoon, the noise in their head has sharpened into a dull ache. They sit on the edge of the green couch while Nadia argues with someone on the phone about grant paperwork in her office. Luca is labeling folders at the main table while muttering insults at a printer. Somewhere down the hall, a faucet squeals. Julian is fixing a cabinet hinge in the kitchen. Of course he is. Arden watches him without meaning to. He works in silence, sleeves pushed up, expression focused. He doesn't insert himself into the room. He just keeps making things steadier, as if that is his language. Arden looks away first. The front of the couch has been worn smooth by years of hands gripping the fabric to stand. The armrest bears a faint ink mark in the shape of a crescent. Evidence. So much evidence. Nadia emerges from her office and takes one look at Arden's face. "That's enough for today," she says. Arden starts to protest, mostly out of reflex, but the words die before they leave their mouth. Nadia softens just a little. "The place will still be here tomorrow." Arden nods. Tomorrow. The word lands with unexpected weight. As Julian gathers his tools from the kitchen counter, Luca looks up from his folders. "You know," he says, too casually to actually be casual, "it already feels more normal with you here." The room goes quiet for half a beat. Arden doesn't know what to say. Normal for whom? For the center? For Julian? For the version of Arden everyone keeps looking for in their face? Julian slips the screwdriver into his bag and says, "Ready?" Arden stands. Their body feels tired in the deep, scraped-out way that has nothing to do with walking. At the door, they pause and look back. The flyers, the couch, the cluttered table. Nadia restacking donated mail with military irritation. Luca arguing softly with the printer like it has personally betrayed him. Julian waiting just to the side, giving them space to choose their own pace. The center is messy, held together by tape and habit and stubbornness. And somehow, standing there with one hand on the doorframe, Arden feels the first small, painful certainty of the day. Whatever they were before the accident, this place mattered. Maybe it still does. Outside, the evening air is cool against their skin. Julian opens the car door, but doesn't speak. Arden lingers before getting in. "Did I love it?" they ask, still looking back at the building. Julian follows their gaze. He doesn't answer immediately. When he finally does, his voice is quiet, enough to keep choosing it. Arden turns to look at him. There is something in his face they can't quite read. Not just affection, history. Then he steps back to let them into the car, and the moment closes before Arden can touch it. As they lower themselves into the passenger seat, they look once more at the cracked window, the crowded bulletin board, the tired old brick holding everything together. A place full of strangers. A place that, somehow, feels less strange every minute. And that frightens them almost as much as the forgetting. Chapter 3. The Stranger Who Stayed. The second day back at the center feels different. Not easier, just less like stepping onto a stage where everyone else already knows the script. Arden still wakes with the same hollow quiet inside their head, but the place itself no longer feels entirely foreign. The hallway smells faintly of lemon cleaner and burnt coffee. Someone has left a half-finished crossword puzzle on the common room table. The radiator near the front door coughs to life with the irritated sigh of old machinery. None of it brings memories, but it brings recognition of pattern. And pattern, Arden realizes, might be the closest thing to memory they have right now. They arrive mid-morning with Julian again. The car ride was quiet, not uncomfortable exactly, but threaded with the kind of awareness that happens when two people share space with history only one of them can see. Julian unlocks the door and holds it open. Arden steps inside. "You're early," they say. Julian shrugs. Habit. Inside, the center is half awake. Nadia is already at her desk with a mug of coffee and a stack of forms that look like they personally offended her. Luca is rearranging chairs in the common room while narrating a dramatic retelling of something that happened on the bus that morning to a volunteer who looks both entertained and trapped. When Luca spots Arden, he points at them like a detective solving a crime. "See," he says to the volunteer. "Alive. I told you." The volunteer blinks. "I didn't know they were dead." "They weren't dead," Lucas says. But the emotional suspense was intense. Arden slides their bag onto the table. "Good morning to you too." Luca grins. "Morning, Amnesia superstar." Nadia looks up over her glasses. "We are not calling them that. I meant it affectionately." "Stop." Luca salutes. Julian moves quietly past them toward the kitchen without interrupting anyone. Within seconds, Arden hears the familiar scrape of cabinet doors and the clink of mugs. Coffee, of course. Arden watches him from the table. Yesterday, they noticed Julian's steadiness. Today, they noticed something else. Precision. He moves around the kitchen like someone navigating a map they've memorized down to the centimeter. He doesn't search for anything. He just reaches, mug, spoon, kettle, like the room is an extension of muscle memory. Arden frowns slightly. "Does he always do that?" they ask. "Do what?" Lucas says, following their gaze. "Know where everything is." Lucas nods. He reorganized the entire kitchen 2 years ago because the mugs were emotionally inefficient. That sounds like something I might have said. "Oh, you absolutely supported the mug should live near the coffee movement," Lucas says. Arden leans back in their chair. "Did we argue about it?" "Not really. You just made a spreadsheet." Arden closes their eyes briefly. "That sounds worse." Nadia mutters from her desk. It was very persuasive. Julian returns with 2 mugs. He sets one in front of Arden without asking. Steam curls up from the surface. Arden stares at it. Tea, Julian says. How did you know I wanted tea? You always drink tea in the morning. Arden picks up the mug slowly. What kind? Black. Honey. No milk. Arden tastes it. Exactly how they would have ordered it if someone had asked. A strange sensation flickers through them. Not memory, but recognition of being known. That's unsettling, Arden says. Julian sits down across from them. You get used to it. Doi. He pauses, then says quietly, You did. The room hums around them. Luca is arguing with the printer again. Nadia is explaining something to a volunteer about funding reports and the emotional fragility of grant deadlines. But Arden's attention stays on Julian. They begin noticing things. The way he watches the room without staring. The way he steps back automatically when someone else needs space. The way he keeps his hands busy, fixing, adjusting, straightening. It's not nervous energy. It's care translated into action. Later that morning, Arden helps sort donation boxes in the back room. They mostly read labels, while Nadia directs traffic with the efficiency of someone who has accepted chaos as a permanent roommate. Julian drifts in and out of the room periodically, repairing a loose shelf or carrying boxes to storage. Every time Arden reaches for something, Julian seems to anticipate it. A chair appears before they realize they want to sit. A water bottle is placed beside them when their throat gets dry. When a volunteer asks Arden a complicated question about resource referrals, Julian steps in with a calm explanation before Arden can panic. It happens so smoothly that Arden almost doesn't notice. Almost. After the 3rd time, they set the clipboard down. Okay, they say. Julian looks up from tightening a screw on the shelf bracket. Okay, what? You keep doing that. Doing what? Anticipating me. Julian considers this. I'm not doing it on purpose. That somehow makes it worse. A corner of his mouth twitches. Arden leans against the table. How long have you known me? Julian wipes his hands on a rag slowly. A few years. Just a few. Yes. Arden studies him. That feels like a carefully edited answer. It's accurate, but not complete. Julian doesn't reply. The silence stretches. Before Arden can push further, Luca appears in the doorway holding a stack of flyers. Emergency design consultation, he declares. Nadia groans from somewhere down the hall. You said no emotional ambushes. This is typography. Luca spreads the flyers across the table. Arden leans over them. Okay, Luca says. Which one looks like a support group? And which one looks like we're starting a mildly friendly cult? Arden studies the 2 fonts. This one is definitely cult adjacent. I knew it. Luca points triumphantly. Julian glances down. The spacing is wrong. Luca squints at him. You weren't even invited into this conversation. You're welcome. The room warms with easy noise. For a few minutes, Arden almost forgets the strange fracture between themselves and their past. Until Luca says, casually and without thinking, You should have seen Julian at the hospital. The room stills. Arden looks up. Julian's shoulders tighten slightly. Luca, he says quietly. What? Luca looks between them. They can know this. Know what? Arden asks. Luca gestures vaguely with the flyer. You were unconscious for most of 3 days. Julian barely left the chair next to your bed. Arden blinks. 3 days. Closer to 4 if you count the night before the surgery. Julian says nothing. Luca keeps talking, unaware of the tension he stepped into. I mean, Nadia had to physically drag him down to the cafeteria at one point because he hadn't eaten anything that wasn't a vending machine bar in like 30 hours. Nadia appears in the doorway at that exact moment. 42, she says. Luca nods solemnly. 42. Arden turns slowly toward Julian. You stayed the whole time? Julian focuses on the screw he's tightening like it's the most important object in the world. I had time. That's not the same thing. He doesn't answer. Arden watches him. Something shifts inside them. Not memory, but curiosity sharpened by the weight of what they're hearing. You said we were friends, Arden says quietly. Julian finally looks up. His expression is calm, but something careful sits underneath it. Yes. Arden folds their arms. Most people don't skip meals for 42 hours for a friend. Julian holds their gaze. No, he agrees. Luca senses the tension and slowly begins gathering the flyers back into a stack. I'm going to go bully the printer, he announces, retreating from the room with suspicious speed. Nadia lingers in the doorway for a moment. Then she disappears too, leaving Arden and Julian alone in the back room. The hum of the building fills the silence. Arden exhales slowly. You know a lot about me, they say. Julian nods once. But I don't know anything about you. That's not true. It feels true. Julian sets the screwdriver down. What do you want to know? Arden opens their mouth. Several questions collide at once. How do we meet? Why did you stay? Or are we to each other? Instead, they ask the smallest one. Why didn't you tell me? Julian studies them. Tell you what? That you were there the whole time. His answer comes immediately. Because it doesn't change anything. Arden frowns. It changes how I understand you. Julian picks up the rag again, twisting it slowly between his hands. I didn't want you to feel like you owed me something. The sentence lands quietly. Arden absorbs it. That careful distance again, like someone deliberately stepping back from the center of their own story. You're very good at staying out of the spotlight, Arden says. Julian shrugs. It's not my favorite place. Arden studies him a moment longer. Then they say the thing that has been growing in their chest all morning. I think there's more to this. Julian's eyes flicker. More to what? To us. The room holds its breath. Julian doesn't deny it, but he doesn't confirm it either. He just says quietly, there used to be. Arden's pulse quickens. What does that mean? Julian looks at them for a long time. Then he stands, picking up his tools. It means, he says carefully, that you should figure out who you are now before worrying about who he used to be. And with that, he walks out of the room, leaving Arden alone with the echo of a sentence that feels far too big to ignore. There used to be, not friendship, something else. Something Julian clearly isn't ready to explain. Arden looks down at the flyers still scattered across the table. Their chest tightens with a new, sharper kind of curiosity. If Julian knows them this well, if he stayed beside their hospital bed for days, then the past Arden lost wasn't just a collection of memories. It was a relationship, and somewhere inside this building full of people who keep looking at them like they've returned from somewhere far away. The truth about that relationship is waiting. Arden just has to find it. Chapter 4. The Journal in the Storage Room. By the end of the week, Arden learns two things about the community center. First, every room contains more things than it logically should. Second, no one ever throws anything away. Archives, Nadia calls it. Hoarding, Luca calls it. Arden stands in the doorway of the storage room and silently agrees with Luca. The space looks like the inside of a memory that has been accumulating for years without anyone deciding where the edges should be. Folding tables lean against the wall beside boxes labeled with old event dates. Plastic bins full of pamphlets sit next to stacks of donated winter coats. There are banners rolled up in corners, outdated laptops, and an impressive tower of binders that looks one small earthquake away from collapse. Dust drifts lazily in the thin light from the high window. Arden folds their arms. And my job today is what exactly? Nadia pushes a box toward them with her foot. Sorting. That's a dangerously vague instruction. Old documents to the left shelf. Event materials in the blue bins. Anything obviously useless can go in the recycling. Nadia pauses. And before you ask, yes, we have a complicated relationship with the word useless. I gathered that, Arden says, eyeing a stack of flyers from something called Queer Bowling Night 2017. Nadia moves efficiently through the room, opening boxes and redistributing their contents with the ruthless pragmatism of someone who has fought this battle before. Arden kneels beside the first box. Inside are old sign-in sheets. Names. Handwriting. Small evidence of hundreds of people passing through this place looking for something, support, safety, a room where they didn't have to explain themselves. Arden runs their thumb along the edge of the stack. It feels strange, touching the record of the community they apparently helped build but can't remember belonging to. You organized most of these, Nadia says without looking up. Arden glances over. I did. You hated when things disappeared into boxes. She gestures vaguely toward the room. Said people deserved proof they existed here. Arden exhales slowly. That sounds like something they might believe. But belief without memory feels unstable, like standing on a bridge made of fog. They keep sorting. Flyers. Old meeting agendas. A stack of thank you cards written in looping handwriting for people Arden has never met. Every so often Nadia tosses a comment over her shoulder. Small pieces of Arden's past delivered with the casual tone of someone describing the weather. You once reorganized the pantry because the soup labels weren't facing the same direction. You convinced 3 local businesses to donate winter coats by accidentally giving a speech about dignity in a parking lot. You banned glitter from the building after the Pride Craft Night incident. Arden pauses mid-stack. There was an incident. Nadia looks at them flatly. There were several. Despite themselves, Arden laughs. The sound echoes slightly in the cramped room. For a moment it feels natural. Then the quiet returns. Arden shifts to another box tucked near the back wall. This one is heavier. Inside are notebooks. Not the thin spiral kind students use, but thick journals with worn covers and elastic bands. Arden lifts the top one. The leather is cracked slightly at the corners. When they open it, the first page reveals careful handwriting. January 4th. I don't know if writing this down will help, but I need proof that I was here before I forget what that felt like. Arden blinks. The words pull at something inside their chest. Not memory, recognition of emotion. Nadia, they say. She turns. Yeah. Arden holds up the journal. What's this? Nadia walks over and glances at the page. Her expression changes immediately. Not alarmed, but thoughtful. That belongs to Kai, she says. Kai Sato. Nadia leans against the shelf. They wrote that during their transition years ago. Arden flips to the next page. More handwriting. Careful, reflective, sometimes messy like the writer was rushing to capture a thought before it disappeared. Why is it here? Because Kai donated it to the center, Nadia says. Said it might help someone someday. Arden reads another line. I keep thinking identity is supposed to arrive fully formed, like a finished sculpture. But maybe it's more like a sketch, lines that change depending on who's holding the pencil. The room feels quieter suddenly. Arden turns another page. The entries move between observations about gender, loneliness, small triumphs, and the strange relief of finally understanding something about yourself after years of confusion. Each paragraph feels intensely personal, but not closed, more like a message placed in a bottle. You used to quote that journal, Nadia says casually. Arden looks up. I did, all the time. She gestures toward the book in Arden's hands. Kai gave you permission to read it when you were helping with one of the support groups. Arden studies the page again. Something about the writing makes their chest tighten. Not because it feels familiar, because it feels close, like standing next to someone describing a feeling you've had, but never found the words for. It's good, Arden says quietly. Yeah, Nadia agrees. Kai's good at putting complicated things into simple sentences. Arden flips further into the journal. The entries shift over time. Early confusion becomes cautious understanding. Fear becomes reflection. The voice grows steadier. Maybe identity isn't something you discover once. Maybe it's something you build every time you choose honesty over silence. Arden stares at that line. For a moment, the storage room fades. Chapter 5. The Shape of a Missing Life. The journal stays in Arden's bag. Not because they're finished with it. Because they aren't. They discover this the next morning when they wake before their alarm and immediately think about the sentence they read the night before. Maybe identity isn't something you discover once. The thought sits in their head like a loose thread. Arden lies in bed staring at the ceiling of Julian's apartment guest room, the dim morning light turning the walls a soft gray. For a few seconds they forget where they are. Then the quiet returns. The quiet inside their head. No childhood memories. No past relationships. No clear map of the person who used to exist before the accident. Just fragments others keep handing them. You organized this. You believe that. You cared about these people. It feels like hearing a biography about someone who shares your name, but not your memories. Arden sits up. Their bag rests on the chair near the window. The journal is inside. They consider opening it again. But the thought of reading more feels strangely heavy this morning, like the book might say something that shifts the ground beneath their feet. Instead, they get dressed and head toward the kitchen. Julian is already there. Of course he is. He stands at the counter with a mug in one hand and a frying pan in the other, moving with the same quiet efficiency Arden has begun to recognize at the center. He glances up when Arden enters. "Morning. Morning." Arden leans against the doorway. "Do you ever sleep?" "Sometimes." That sounds suspicious. Julian flips something in the pan. "Eggs." Arden watches him for a moment. "Did you always cook breakfast?" "Yes." "For me?" Julian shrugs slightly. "I cooked for whoever was hungry." That feels like a partial truth. Arden notices the second mug already sitting on the table. "There. Black. Honey. No milk. Exactly the same as yesterday." "You're very confident about my tea preferences," Arden says, sitting down. "You haven't complained yet." That's not the same thing as confirming. Julian places a plate on the table. "You used to complain immediately if it was wrong." Arden picks up the mug. They take a sip. It tastes right, and that unsettles them again. "Did I talk about myself a lot before the accident?" Arden asks. Julian looks mildly surprised by the question. "Not really. So how does everyone know so much about me?" Julian sits across from them. "Because you spend a lot of time listening to other people." Arden frowns slightly. "That seems unfair." "You didn't think so." Arden pokes at the eggs thoughtfully. "Did I seem confident?" Julian considers this. "Yes." Arden laughs softly. "That feels impossible. You were good at hiding uncertainty." "That feels more believable." They eat in silence for a moment. Outside the window, the morning traffic hums faintly. Someone walks a dog past the building. Life continuing with the indifferent momentum of ordinary days. Arden sets the fork down. "What was I like?" Julian doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he studies Arden carefully, as if deciding how much truth fits into a single sentence. "Curious," he says finally. "That's vague. You asked a lot of questions." "I'm still doing that." "Yes." Arden leans back in the chair. "Did I seem happy?" Julian pauses. The hesitation is subtle, but Arden catches it. "Sometimes," he says. That answer lands with surprising weight. "Sometimes," Arden repeats. "You cared about a lot of things." That's not the same as happiness. "No." Arden stares into the tea. The surface reflects the kitchen light like a tiny distorted mirror. "So I built a life around the community center," they say slowly. "Yes." "And I apparently help people there." "Yes." "And everyone keeps telling me I matter to that place." Julian nods. Arden looks up. "But none of that tells me who I actually was." Julian folds his arms. "That's because identity isn't a resume." Arden blinks. "That sounds like something I might have said." Julian's mouth curves slightly. "You did." Arden groans softly and covers their face with both hands. "Great. I was philosophical. You were thoughtful." That's just a nicer word for exhausting. Julian doesn't argue, which somehow makes it worse. Arden drops their hands. "I keep waiting for something to come back," they admit quietly. "A memory, a feeling, something that tells me the person everyone's describing is actually me." Julian listens without interrupting. "But all I get are these descriptions," Arden continues. "Like I'm assembling a puzzle without the picture on the box." Julian nods slowly. "That's normal." "According to who?" "Dr. Shaw." Arden sighs. "Right. The neurologist who keeps telling me not to force anything." Julian takes a sip of his coffee. He's not wrong. Arden looks at him carefully. "You seem very calm about all of this." "I'm trying to be helpful." "That's not what I asked." Julian sets the mug down. "You want honesty?" "Yes." "I'm calm because pushing you to remember won't work." That still sounds like a medical opinion. Julian meets their eyes. "And because the person you become now matters more than the one you used to be." The sentence lands differently than Arden expects. Not comforting, not dismissive, just steady. Arden tilts their head. "You really believe that?" "Yes." "Even if the new version of me is completely different?" Julian doesn't hesitate. "Yes." Arden studies his face. That same careful distance again, like someone deliberately refusing to shape the outcome. Were we close? Arden asks. Julian looks at the window. We work together a lot. That's not an answer. It's the one that matters right now. Arden exhales slowly. You're doing that thing again. What thing? Editing the truth. Julian doesn't deny it. Instead, he stands and carries his plate to the sink. We should leave soon, he says. Nadia has a meeting this morning. Arden watches him rinse the dishes. The conversation feels unfinished. But pushing harder right now feels like trying to pry open a locked door with bare hands. They stand and grab their bag from the chair. The weight of the journal inside, it is suddenly very noticeable. Arden slides the strap over their shoulder. Julian? He turns. I found something yesterday, they say. What? A journal in the storage room. It belongs to someone named Kai. Recognition flickers across Julian's face. Kaisato. You know them? Yes. Arden taps the side of their bag lightly. They wrote about identity like it's something you build over time. Julian nods. That sounds like Kai. Arden studies him. Did I believe that too? Julian thinks for a moment. Then he says quietly, I think you were trying to. The answer lingers between them. Not a confirmation. Not a contradiction. Just another fragment of the person Arden used to be. Arden looks down at the bag again. The journal waits inside. A map written by someone who once stood in the same uncertain space. And suddenly Arden understands something they didn't the night before. Maybe the journal isn't just about Kai's transition. Maybe it's about something larger. How people change. How identity survives transformation. How someone becomes themselves more than once. Arden lifts their head. Okay, they say. Julian raises an eyebrow. Okay, what? Arden adjusts the strap on their shoulder. Okay, they repeat. I'm going to figure out who I am. Julian studies them carefully. Then he nods. Good plan. And for the first time since the accident, the question doesn't feel like a void. It feels like a direction. Chapter 6. The Quiet Devotion of Julian Ibarra. The first time Arden notices it clearly, Julian is fixing a door that technically isn't broken. The community center side entrance has always stuck slightly when it rains. Arden knows this because Nadia mentioned it twice the previous week while muttering about maintenance budgets. The door still opens and closes. It just requires a little shoulder, which is why it's strange to see Julian crouched beside the hinges with a screwdriver and a folded cloth, the door propped open while he studies the metal plate like it has personally insulted him. Arden leans against the hallway wall and watches. You know it works fine, right? They say. Julian doesn't look up. It sticks. So do a lot of things in this building. Yes. Arden waits. The screwdriver turns once, twice, slow and precise. But doors shouldn't, Julian finishes. The answer is so simple Arden almost laughs. Instead, they slide down the wall until they're sitting on the floor opposite him, stretching their legs into the hallway. Is this what you do all day? Arden asks. Sometimes. You fix things that technically still work. Julian glances up briefly. They work better after. Arden watches the calm concentration on his face, the way his shoulders stay relaxed even when the screw resists slightly. Do you ever stop? Julian pauses. Stop what? Taking care of everything. Julian studies the hinge again. I'm fixing a door. That wasn't the question. He doesn't answer. The silence stretches comfortably between them, filled with the faint hum of the building. Somewhere in the front room, Luca is explaining something loudly about font choices to a volunteer. The printer makes a wounded mechanical sound. Arden tilts their head. You were like this before the accident, weren't you? Julian wipes a smudge of dust from the hinge. Yes. That explains a lot. Like what? Like why everyone seems extremely calm about the fact that you're basically holding the place together with a screwdriver. Julian shrugs. It's not complicated work. Arden lets out a quiet breath. That's not what I mean. Julian finally meets their eyes. The look is steady, curious, but careful. Arden recognizes that expression now. He listens fully, but reveals almost nothing. It started to irritate them. Later that afternoon, the center fills with its usual midweek chaos. A youth group meeting takes over the common room. Someone has brought too many pastries. Nadia argues gently with the delivery driver about the correct address for a donation box. Arden sits at the long table with a stack of intake forms and tries to remember how any of this used to feel natural. The forms blur slightly in front of them. Names, questions, contact information. They know intellectually that they used to manage this system. Everyone keeps saying so, but knowledge without memory feels hollow. Like being told you once spoke a language fluently while staring at a page full of symbols you can't read. Hey, Arden looks up. Luca drops into the chair beside them, sliding a plate of pastries across the table. You look like someone asked you to calculate taxes emotionally, he says. Arden picks up a croissant. I'm trying to figure out how any of this works. You used to run this table like an air traffic controller. That's not reassuring. Luca grins. You were terrifyingly organized. I still might be, Arden says. We just don't have proof yet. Across the room, Julian appears carrying a box of donated books. He moves through the crowd quietly, greeting people with small nods, placing the box on the shelf near the back wall. Arden notices something else now that they're paying attention. People gravitate toward him without thinking. A volunteer asks where the extra chairs are stored. Someone else hands him a broken stapler. A teenager quietly asks if he knows where the quiet room is. Julian answers each question calmly. No hosetashchen. No eretashchen. Just steady presence. Arden nujis Luca. Does he always do that? Do what? Act like the building's nervous system. Luca's norths. That's the most accurate description I've heard. Arden watches Julian take the broken stapler, examine it briefly, and fix it in about 3 seconds. Does he ever ask for anything? Arden asks. Luca's grin fades slightly. Not really. That seems unhealthy. It's Julian. That's not an explanation. It kind of is. Arden frowns. Did I notice this before? Luca glances at them. Oh yeah. And you try to get him to stop doing everything himself. Arden perks up. That sounds promising. Didn't work. Of course it didn't. Luca slides another pastry across the table. You to make him take lunch breaks sometimes, though. Arden looks back toward Julian. He's kneeling beside the bookshelf now, adjusting something that probably didn't need adjusting. Did we argue about it? Constantly. Arden smiles faintly. That feels right, even if they don't remember it. The center quiets after dinner hours. The youth group leaves. The pastries disappear. Nadia locks her office with the exhausted dignity of someone who survived another day of administrative warfare. Arden is wiping down the table when Julian appears beside them with a rag. You don't have to do that, he says. You keep saying that, Arden replies. You're still recovering. So are you. Julian raises an eyebrow. I wasn't in the accident. Arden tosses the rag onto the table. No, you just stayed in a hospital chair for 3 days. Julian stills. Luca clearly told them more details than he intended. For a moment, neither of them speaks. The room hums quietly under the fluorescent lights. You shouldn't worry about that, Julian says finally. I'm not worrying, Arden replies. I'm curious. Julian crosses his arms loosely. That's dangerous. I've been told. Arden studies him. You take care of people like it's automatic. Julian shrugs. People need help. That's not the whole story. It's enough of it. Arden leans against the table. And where do you fit into that equation? Julian doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he folds the rag carefully, placing it beside the sink. I'm good at logistics, he says. That's the most emotionally evasive sentence I've heard all week. Julian smiles faintly. Efficiency. Arden exhales slowly. You really don't like talking about yourself. It's rarely useful. That depends on the context. Julian glances toward the doorway. Are we having a therapy session? Maybe. I should charge you. Arden laughs. The sound surprises them both. Then the laughter fades, leaving a quieter tension behind. Arden looks at him carefully. I keep noticing things they say, such as, you know exactly when to step in when someone's overwhelmed. Julian says nothing. You bring me tea before I realize I want it. Silence. And you reorganize the center's kitchen. Julian sighs. The mugs were inefficiently located. Arden watches him. You care about people a lot, they say quietly. Julian's shoulders tighten almost imperceptibly. I care about the center functioning. That's not the same thing. Julian meets their gaze. For a moment, the calm surface cracks slightly. Not anger. Something more complicated. People matter, he says. Arden feels something shift inside their chest. Not memory, not recognition, just awareness. The quiet gravity of someone who stays. Even when no one asks them to. Arden tilts their head. Were we close? Julian looks away. We worked together a lot. That's not what I meant. Julian's expression returns to neutral calm. It's the answer I'm giving. Arden watches him for a long moment. Then they nod slowly. Okay. Julian seems surprised by the lack of argument. Arden picks up the rag again and wipes the table once more. I'm not going to force the story, they say. Julian studies them. But I'm starting to notice things. Like what? Arden meets his eyes. Like the fact that you keep pretending none of this matters to you. Julian doesn't respond. But the silence itself feels like confirmation. Arden tosses the rag back onto the counter. I'll figure it out eventually, they say. Julian nods once. I know. Arden heads toward the door. But just before leaving, they pause. Julian? Yes. Arden hesitates, then says quietly, whatever we were before, you must have really cared about me. Julian doesn't move. The room feels suddenly smaller. Finally he says, yes. Just one word. Calm. Certain. And far more revealing than anything else he said all day. Arden steps outside into the cool evening air. Their heart is beating faster than it should. Because for the first time since the accident, the mystery of their past doesn't just feel confusing. It feels personal. And Julian Ibarra is standing directly in the center of it. Chapter 7. Lessons from a Journal. Arden doesn't intend to read the journal during work hours. They tell themselves that twice. Then a third time. By the fourth day of carrying it in their bag, the promise is quietly dissolved. It happens during a lull in the afternoon when the center is between events. The youth group hasn't arrived yet. The intake desk is empty. Even Luca has disappeared into the copy room to wage another philosophical war with the printer. Arden sits at the back table with a mug of tea and the journal open in front of him. The cover is worn soft from years of handling. The pages smell faintly like paper and dust and something older, time-preserved in handwriting. They flip to the entry they stopped at the night before. Kai, May 12th. Today someone asked me when I knew who I was. I didn't have an answer. I still don't. But I think identity might be less like a discovery and more like construction. Something you build slowly with materials you didn't know you had. Arden sits back. The sentence feels strangely familiar. Not the words themselves, the shape of the idea. They close the journal halfway and stare out toward the hallway. Construction. The thought presses against the hollow space in their mind where memories should live. If identity is something you build, what happens when a foundation disappears? Careful. Arden jumps slightly. Kai Sato stands in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a paper cup in one hand. Those entries can cause existential spirals, Kai says mildly. Arden straightens. I wasn't spiraling. Kai raises an eyebrow. You were staring into space with the expression of someone questioning the nature of reality. That's just my face. Kai laughs quietly and walks over. Mind if I sit? Please. I feel like I've been accidentally reading your thoughts for 3 days. Kai settles into the chair across from Arden and glances down at the open journal. That one was written during my everything is terrifying, but I'm pretending to be philosophical about it phase. Relatable, Arden says. Kai studies them for a moment. You're reading it very carefully. It's helpful. That was the idea. Arden turns the page. I keep wondering something. Kai gestures for them to continue. When you wrote this, Arden says slowly, were you trying to explain yourself to other people or to yourself? Kai smiles. Yes. That's not an answer. It's the honest one. They lean forward slightly. When you're rebuilding your sense of self, language becomes a tool. Writing helps you see the structure of what you're thinking. Arden taps the edge of the page. You make it sound very deliberate. It wasn't. Okay, kshutkless softly. It felt like wandering around a construction site without a blueprint. That image lands in Arden's chest. A construction site. Half-built identity. Exposed beams where certainty should be. That's what this feels like, Arden admits. Kai nods immediately. Of course it does. They gesture toward Arden's head. You lost the narrative thread of your own life. Anyone would feel disoriented. Everyone keeps telling me not to force the memories, Arden says. Dr. Shaw, yes, he's right. Arden exhales. That's the frustrating part. Kai watches them quietly. Tell me something, Kai says after a moment. What's the hardest part so far? Arden doesn't answer right away. They glance around the center. The familiar mess of chairs, flyers, and donated furniture. The place everyone says used to be their second home. It's the way people look at me, Arden says finally. Kai tilts their head. How so? Like they're waiting for someone to come back. Kai's expression softens slightly. That must feel strange. It feels like I'm disappointing them. You're not. It feels that way. Kai leans back in their chair. People remember the version of you they knew, they say. That doesn't mean they expect you to be identical to that person. Maybe not consciously. Arden closes the journal gently. But they have a history with someone I don't recognize. Okay, not slowly. That's the paradox of memory loss. What do you mean? You're still the same person biologically. The same mind, the same instincts, the same emotional architecture. They tap the journal lightly. But the story you used to understand yourself has been erased. Arden considers that. So, I'm unfinished. Que smiles. We all are. That sounds suspiciously comforting. It's meant to be. They gesture toward the journal. Keep reading. Arden hesitates. What if I don't like what I find out about who I used to be? Que surubsgently. Then you'll build something different. That sounds too easy. It isn't easy, Kai says calmly. But it is possible. Arden studies them. You really believe identity is that flexible? Que logus softly. I'm a trans person who documented their own transition in a journal. Flexibility is basically my life philosophy. Arden smiles. That's fair. Kai takes a sip of their coffee. Besides, they add, you were already doing that before the accident. Arden blinks. Yes. Kai's voice is thoughtful now. You used to talk about identity the same way I wrote about it. Arden leans forward slightly. What did I say? Kai thinks for a moment. Something about how identity isn't a destination, they say slowly. It's a relationship between who you've been and who you're trying to become. Arden stares at them. I said that. Kai nods. You said a lot of things like that. Arden sinks back in their chair. That sounds exhausting. Kai logs. Chapter 8. The Community That Remembers. The first time it happens, Arden thinks it's an accident. They're standing at the intake desk, trying to remember where the extra pens are supposed to be when a woman in a bright yellow raincoat walks into the center, spots them, and freezes. Then her face lights up. Arden. The name lands with the strange double sensation Arden has grown used to. Recognition without ownership. Yes, they say carefully. The woman crosses the room in 3 fast steps and pulls them into a quick hug before Arden can react. You're back, she says. Nadia told me about the accident, but I didn't realize you were already coming in again. Arden stands there for a second, hands awkwardly hovering in the air before settling lightly on the woman's shoulders. Apparently I am, they say. She laughs, the sound warm and relieved. Oh, thank God. I was worried you'd disappear on us. Disappear. The word sticks in Arden's mind. Did I do that before? Arden asks. The woman tilts her head. Disappear? No. The opposite, actually. Before Arden can ask what that means, Nadia's voice cuts across the room. Clara, stop interrogating the recovering amnesiac and come help me with the supply order. Clara lifts both hands in surrender. Fine. But it's really good to see you, she says to Arden, softer now. Then she heads toward Nadia's office. Arden watches her go. The center buzzes around them. Chairs scraping, someone laughing near the couch, Luca arguing loudly with the printer again. And suddenly the building feels different. Not just familiar, crowded, full of history Arden can't access. By late afternoon, the encounters start stacking up. A volunteer from the youth program stops by the desk. Hey, Arden, do we still keep the art supplies in the... She stops mid-sentence. Oh, sorry. I forgot. Forgot what? Arden asks. The memory thing. She looks mortified. Arden shrugs lightly. Honestly, I'm also forgetting things. So we're even. She laughs nervously and points toward the supply closet. You used to hide the good markers in the top cabinet so the middle schoolers wouldn't destroy them. That sounds like a solid system. It works surprisingly well. She waves and disappears down the hallway. Arden writes markers, top cabinet on a sticky note and sticks it to the desk. Another small piece of someone else's life. Another fragment. It's Miriam who finally sits down long enough for the pattern to become clear. The older woman lowers herself into the chair across from Arden with the deliberate care of someone who refuses to rush anything. You look overwhelmed, she says. I'm collecting evidence, Arden replies. Evidence of what? That I apparently had a full life here. Miriam smiles gently. Yes, you did. Arden studies her. You remember me too. Of course. Everyone does. That tends to happen when someone spends years building a community, Miriam says. Arden exhales slowly. That's the part one can't picture. Miriam folds her hands on the table. Why not? Because the version of me people keep describing sounds confident. You were. That seems unlikely. Miriam chuckles softly. Confidence is often just persistence wearing a good disguise. Arden leans back in their chair. Everyone has stories about me, they say. Yes, but none of them feel like mine. Miriam studies Arden's face for a long moment. That must be lonely, she says quietly. Arden doesn't answer. Across the room, Julian is carrying a box of donated books toward the back shelf. He moves through the room like someone used to navigating crowded spaces without disturbing them. The sight steadies something in Arden's chest. Miriam notices the glance. He remembers everything, she says. Arden looks back at her. Yes, and he's very careful not to tell me any of it. Miriam smiles knowingly. That sounds like Julian. Why? Because he respects autonomy almost to a fault. Arden frowns. So everyone here has decided I need to rediscover my own life like some kind of emotional scavenger hunt. Miriam laughs softly. Not everyone, just the entire building. More or less. Arden rubs her forehead. This is incredibly frustrating. Yes, Miriam agrees. The agreement is so immediate. Arden looks up in surprise. You're not going to give me a philosophical speech? Oh, I could, Miriam says. But frustration is a reasonable response to losing your past. Arden exhales. Good. They glance around the room again. So all these people, Clara, the youth volunteers, the guy who keeps dropping off books. Thomas, Miriam supplies. Right, Thomas. They all knew me. Yes. And I helped them somehow. Very often. Arden taps the edge of the desk. But I don't remember helping anyone. Miriam's voice softens. Helping people changes them more than it changes you. That's comforting. Is it? Not really. They both laugh quietly. That evening, the center begins to empty. Nadia locks her office. Luca leaves with a dramatic monologue about printer conspiracies. The volunteers head out in pairs. Arden stays behind to finish organizing the intake forms. Julian is stacking chairs again. The rhythm of the building, slowing down, feels almost peaceful. Arden sets the last folder into the drawer and walks over. You know something I don't, they say. Julian glances up. That's very likely. No sarcasm. Then yes. Arden folds their arms. Everyone here remembers me. Yes. They all have stories. Yes. And you refuse to tell me any of them. Julian sets the chair down carefully. That's not entirely true. You tell me neutral facts, Arden says. You don't tell me the emotional ones. Julian doesn't deny it. Arden studies him. Why? Julian considers the question longer this time. Finally, he says, because memory shapes identity. And I don't want to shape yours for you. Arden leans against the table. That sounds noble. It's practical. Is it? Yes. Arden watches him for a moment. Everyone else here has pieces of my past, they say. Julian nods. But you're the only one who has the whole picture. Julian's expression stills. That's not entirely true. But it's close. The silence stretches. Arden tilts their head slightly. You were important to me, they say. Julian doesn't answer. You must have been, Arden continues. Otherwise, people wouldn't keep looking at us like we're standing in the middle of a story. Julian's voice stays quiet. People like stories. This isn't about people. Arden steps a little closer. It's about us. The The room feels smaller suddenly. Julian meets their eyes. For a moment, something raw flickers behind his calm expression. Then it's gone. Maybe, he says. Arden studies him. That wasn't a denial. No. The answer hangs between them. Arden's pulse quickens slightly. So there's a story, they say. Julian looks toward the door. Yes. Are you ever going to tell me? Julian pauses. Then he says quietly, when you're ready to hear it. Arden exhales slowly. That's not the same thing as when you're ready to tell it. Julian doesn't argue. Instead, he picks up another chair and places it on the stack. Conversation over. But the answer lingers in the room like a loose thread. A story. One Julian clearly knows by heart, and one Arden is beginning to suspect might change everything once they hear it. Outside, the evening air presses softly against the windows. Inside the center, the quiet hum of the building continues. Holding memories Arden can't yet reach. Chapter 9. The Shape of Absence. Arden wakes before the alarm because something feels wrong. For a few seconds they lie still in the unfamiliar quiet of the apartment, staring at the pale rectangle of morning light on the ceiling. The room smells faintly like coffee grounds and detergent. Their brain does the slow work of assembling reality. The accident, the memory loss, the center, Julian. The same facts as yesterday, but something underneath them feels unsettled, like a thought that tried to surface during sleep and gave up halfway. Arden exhales and sits up. The apartment is quiet except for the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. They swing their legs over the side of the bed and pause when they notice something strange. Their phone is on a nightstand. That's normal. What isn't normal is the open note on the screen. A message, not typed recently. Something older. Arden picks up the phone. The note contains only one sentence. If I ever forget this life, please make sure I remember the center. Arden stares at it. The timestamp says it was written 8 months ago. Their chest tightens slightly. They don't remember writing it. But the sentence feels deliberate, like a promise made to a future version of themselves. Arden rubs their face. Okay, they mutter. The day has officially begun with existential intrigue. The center is already busy when Arden arrives. Someone has left a box of donated winter coats near the front desk. Nadia is speaking into her phone with a particular calm intensity that means she's negotiating with a bureaucratic system that deserves to be set on fire. Julian is at the coffee station refilling the kettle. Of course he is. Arden pauses just inside the doorway, watching him for a moment. He moves with the same quiet efficiency they've been noticing for weeks, small adjustments to the space that make everything run more smoothly. The kettle lid clicks closed. Julian turns. Their eyes meet. The brief flash of recognition on his face steadies something in Arden's chest. Morning, he says. Morning. Arden walks over and drops their bag onto the table. I found something weird today. Julian raises an eyebrow. That's a broad category. Arden pulls out their phone and slides it across the table. Julian reads the sentence. The change in his expression is subtle but immediate. A flicker of surprise. Then something softer. You wrote that, he says. Clearly, Arden replies. I'm just curious why. Julian, hand the phone back. You cared about this place. That part I've gathered. Arden watches him carefully. But writing a message to my future amnesiac self seems dramatic. Julian's mouth twitches. You had a flair for contingency planning. That's not an explanation. No, he agrees. Arden waits. Julian doesn't continue. The kettle begins to whistle softly behind him. He turns to switch it off. Conversation closed. Arden exhales through their nose. Everyone here does that, they say. Does what? Stops talking right before the interesting part. Julian pours hot water into 2 mugs. That's because the interesting part belongs to you. Arden leans against the counter. That's very philosophical for someone who refuses to elaborate. Julian, hand him a mug. There. Arden accepts it reluctantly. You're dodging again? Yes. At least you admit it. It saves time. Arden takes a sip. The tea is exactly the way they like it, which is unsettling because they don't remember telling Julian how they like their tea. Do we live together? Arden asks suddenly. Julian chokes slightly on his own tea. No. The answer comes too fast. Arden raises an eyebrow. Interesting reaction, though. Julian clears his throat. You're jumping several chapters ahead. That wasn't a no. Yes, it was. Arden studies him. Julian looks extremely focused on the kettle. The afternoon brings another wave of familiar strangers. A teenager Arden vaguely recognizes from the youth group drops by the desk. Hey, she says nervously, do you still do the college application workshop? Arden hesitates. Did I before? Oh, the girl shifts awkwardly. I forgot about the memory thing. It's becoming a popular theme, Arden says. She smiles faintly. You helped me write my personal essay last year. Arden blinks. I did, yeah. The girl's voice warms slightly. You told me to stop trying to sound impressive and just tell the truth. Arden feels something strange twist in their chest. That sounds like good advice, they say carefully. It worked, the girl replies. She waves the acceptance letter she's holding. I got in. Arden stares at the paper. For a moment, they feel like they're standing in someone else's life again. A version of themselves who apparently knew how to help people change their futures. That's incredible, Arden says. The girl grins. You said I'd be okay. Arden swallows. I'm glad I was right. She heads out a few minutes later, still smiling. Arden sits there staring at the empty chair. The feeling in their chest lingers. Not memory, but something adjacent to it. Pride. That evening the center quiets again. Julian is locking the supply closet when Arden approaches. I think I'm starting to understand something, Arden says. Julian glances up. What's that? This place mattered to me because it mattered to other people. Julian nods slowly. That's part of it. Arden leans against the wall. The message on my phone makes more sense now. Yes. Arden studies him. But there's still something missing. Julian's expression stays calm. What? Arden tilts their head slightly. You. Julian stills. You keep appearing in every version of this story, Arden continues. The center, the hospital, the way everyone looks at us when we're in the same room. Julian doesn't move. Arden's voice softens. You're not just part of the background. The room feels suddenly very quiet. Julian exhales slowly. No, he says. I didn't think so. Arden takes a step closer. So what were you to me? Julian meets their eyes. For a moment, the careful composure cracks. Not completely, but enough. You are my friend, he says. Arden studies his face. That sounds incomplete. Julian almost smiles. It is. Arden's pulse quickens. But you're not going to finish this sentence. Julian shakes his head gently. No. Why? Because some things deserve to be remembered, he says quietly. Not just explained. Arden holds his gaze. And if I never remember? Julian's voice stays steady. Then we'll build something new. The sentence lands between them with quiet weight. Not tragic. Not hopeful. Just honest. Arden exhales slowly. Okay, they say. Julian looks slightly surprised. That's it. For now. Arden pushes away from the wall. But I'm starting to think my past isn't the only mystery here. Julian raises an eyebrow. What do you mean? Arden heads toward the door. I think you're hiding half the story, they say over their shoulder. Julian watches them go. And I'm starting to get very curious about the other half. Outside, the evening air is cool and quiet. Inside the center, the lights hum softly. And somewhere between the memories Arden lost and the ones the building still holds, a story is slowly beginning to surface. Chapter 10. The story everyone knows. The rumor reaches Arden before the person does. It begins with Luca leaning across the intake desk that morning with the expression of someone about to deliver excellent gossip. So, he says, lowering his voice dramatically, someone from your past is coming today. Arden looks up from the intake forms. Technically, everyone here is from my past. No, Lucas says, shaking his head. I mean a capital P past person. Arden closes the folder slowly. That sounds threatening. It's not threatening, Lucas says. It's just significant. Arden studies him. You're enjoying this too much. I thrive on narrative tension. Luca gestures toward the door. You'll see. Before Arden can interrogate him further, Nadia appears beside the desk carrying 2 boxes of donated supplies. Luca, she says sharply, if you are spreading rumors again. I'm spreading anticipation, Luca replies. Nadia rolls her eyes and disappears toward the storage room. Arden turns back to Luca. Define significant. You'll find out in about 10 minutes, Lucas says, standing up. And before you ask, yes, Julian knows. That sentence lands like a dropped coin. And Arden asks, and he has been quietly reorganizing the coffee station for the last 20 minutes. Arden glances across the room. Sure enough, Julian is adjusting the stack of mugs with unnecessary precision. Arden exhales. Great, they mutter. Relax, Lucas says cheerfully. It's not bad news. You literally described it as significant. Significant doesn't mean bad. Arden stares at the door. 10 minutes suddenly feels like a countdown. The door opens exactly 12 minutes later. A tall person with wind-tangled hair steps inside, pausing just long enough to take in the room. Arden recognizes the reaction before they recognize the person. Relief. The kind that moves through someone's shoulders when they find something they've been worried about losing. Arden, the stranger says. The voice is warm, steady, and unmistakably familiar in a way Arden can't place. Arden stands. Hi, they say cautiously. The person walks closer. You probably don't remember me, they say gently. That has become a recurring theme, Arden replies. The stranger smiles. I'm Mato. The name means nothing, but something about the way the room reacts to it does. Lucas suddenly becomes very interested in rearranging papers. Nadia pauses in the doorway. And Julian has stopped moving entirely. Mateo notices. His expression shifts slightly. Hey, Jules, he says. Julian nods once. Mateo. Arden looks between them. Okay, they say slowly. Clearly I'm missing several chapters here. Mateo laughs softly. That's fair. He turns back to Arden. We used to work together, he says. At the center. Arden frowns. Recently, a few years ago, you left. Mateo nods. Graduate school. Arden gestures vaguely at the room. And you came back because I heard about the accident, Mateo says. The room quiets slightly. Arden shifts their weight. That seems to be how everyone ends up here lately. Mateo studies them carefully. How are you doing? Arden considers the question. I know a lot of facts, they say finally. None of them belong to me yet. Mateo nods slowly. That sounds frustrating. That's the polite word for it. He glances around the center. You're still coming here, though. Apparently, I told my future self to. Mateo smiles faintly. That tracks. Arden folds their arms. Everyone keeps saying things like that. Like what? Like I'm exactly the kind of person who would plan for my own memory loss. Mateo laughs. You once made a 3-page document explaining how the snack cabinet should be organized. Arden stares at him. That feels like slander. It was extremely detailed. Luca calls from across the room. Traitor, Arden mutters. Mateo leans against the desk. You took the center seriously, he says. It mattered to you. Arden glances toward Julian. That's what everyone keeps saying. Mateo follows their gaze. Something complicated passes across his face. Yeah, he says quietly. Arden notices. Okay, they say. That expression definitely means there's a story I'm not being told. Mateo looks back at them. There are a few, he admits. Of course there are. Arden gestures toward Julian. He's already refusing to tell me half of them. Mateo chuckles. That also tracks. Julian finally speaks from across the room. Mateo, he says calmly, you just arrived? Yes, Mateo replies. Maybe give Arden time before opening every emotional archive in the building. Mateo raises his hands. Fair. Arden sighs dramatically. You people are exhausting. Later that evening, Mateo sits with Arden in the quiet corner of the center. The building has settled into its usual nighttime calm. So, Arden says, tell me one thing. Only one. I'm pacing myself. Mateo smiles. Okay. Arden leans forward. What was I like before the accident? Mateo considers the question. You were curious, he says. That hasn't changed. No. Mateo nods. But you were also stubborn. Still accurate. And you believe people deserved second chances. Arden studies him. That sounds idealistic. It was. Mateo glances toward the hallway where Julian disappeared earlier. But you believe it anyway. Arden follows his gaze. You keep looking at him. Mateo sighs quietly. That's because the biggest story in this building involves the two of you. Arden feels their pulse jump. I knew it. Mateo laughs softly. Everyone knows it. Except me. Mateo nods. Except you. Arden leans back in the chair. And I'm guessing you're not allowed to explain it either. Mateo hesitates. Let's just say, he smiles slightly. That story belongs to Julian as much as it belongs to you. Arden groans. Fantastic. Mateo stands. You'll figure it out, he says. Everyone keeps saying that. That's because you will. Arden watches him walk toward the door. The center feels quieter after he leaves. Across the room, Julian reappears carrying a stack of folded chairs. Their eyes meet briefly, and Arden realizes something unsettling. The story everyone else seems to know isn't just about the center. It's about them, and Julian, and whatever happened between them before the accident. A story that, sooner or later, someone's going to have to tell. Chapter 11. The question no one wants to answer. The question starts following Arden around 3 days after Mateo leaves. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly persistent, like a splinter they can't quite reach. Everyone knows something, and everyone keeps refusing to say it. The center continues its normal rhythm around them. Coffee in the mornings. Youth group on Wednesdays. Luca narrating printer failures like tragic theater. Nadia negotiating with grant offices like a seasoned diplomat fighting a bureaucratic war. Life goes on, but the question stays. Every time Arden walks into a room with Julian. Every time someone looks at both of them in the same careful way. Every time a story almost forms and then stops just short of the part that matters. By Friday evening, Arden is done pretending patience is a personality trait. The center is nearly empty when it happens. The last volunteer leaves just after 9, offering a tired wave and promising to return the borrowed projector on Monday. Nadia locks her office with the solemn dignity of someone who has survived another day of paperwork. Luca disappears toward the subway, loudly announcing his intention to emotionally recover from the printer's continued betrayal. The building exhales. Quiet settles into the hallways. Arden stands in the common room, pretending to straighten a stack of intake folders while watching Julian move around the kitchen. He's washing mugs. Of course he is. The water runs softly. Cabinet doors open and close. The quiet efficiency Arden has grown used to fills the room like background music. But tonight it doesn't feel neutral. Tonight it feels like avoidance. Arden crosses the room. Julian, they say. He glances up briefly. Yeah. Can we talk? Something in their tone makes him pause. He shuts off the water and dries his hands slowly on a towel before turning toward them. We are talking, he says. You know what I mean? Julian leans back against the counter. Okay, he says quietly. Arden folds their arms. Everyone here knows something about us, they say. Julian doesn't respond. Mateo knew. Luca knows. Nadia definitely knows. Still silence. Arden exhales sharply, and every time the conversation gets close to the answer, everyone suddenly becomes extremely respectful of my emotional autonomy. Julian almost smiles. That sounds like this building. It's infuriating, Arden says. Probably. Julian. The name lands harder this time. He meets their eyes. The calm expression is still there. But Arden notices something else now. Tension. A thin line of it in the way his shoulders hold still. Ask the question, he says quietly. Arden hesitates. They've imagined this moment several times over the last few days. Each version felt different. Some angry, some awkward, some strangely hopeful. Now that it's here, the words feel heavier than expected. What were we? They ask. The room goes still. Not dramatic silence, just the quiet kind that happens when something important enters the air. Julian doesn't answer immediately. He looks past Arden for a moment, toward the dark window above the sink. Rain has started outside, soft against the glass. Arden waits. You already know part of it, Julian says eventually. Friends, Arden replies. Yes. That's not the whole story. No, he agrees. The confirmation sends a strange ripple through Arden's chest. Not surprise. Validation. They take a step closer. Everyone keeps saying this is my story to rediscover, Arden says. But it's also yours. Julian studies them carefully. Yes. So I'm asking you. The rain taps softly against the window. Julian exhales. Then he walks past Arden and pulls out one of the chairs at the long table. Sit, he says. Arden frowns slightly. Is this going to be that kind of conversation? Probably. Arden sits. Julian remains standing for a moment, hands resting on the back of the opposite chair. The distance between them is small, but it feels enormous. Finally, he sits down too. For a few seconds, neither of them speaks. The building creaks softly around them. Arden feels their pulse in their throat. We met here, Julian begins. At the center, Arden says, yes. Through volunteering? Through a support group, Julian says. Arden blinks. I was in a support group. You facilitated it, Julian says. That startles a short laugh out of Arden. That seems like an administrative error. You were good at it, Julian says simply. Arden watches him carefully. And you attended? Julian nods. At first. What changed? Julian's mouth curves faintly. You asked me to help run it. That sounds like me delegating responsibility. It was, Julian agrees. Arden leans forward slightly. So we became friends. Yes. And then... Julian looks down at the table. His thumb traces the edge of a scratch in the wood. And then we started spending more time together, he says. Outside the center? Sometimes. Arden feels the tension tightening again. They're getting close to something. Julian, they say quietly, did we date? Julian stills. The pause answers the question before the words arrive. Yes, he says. Arden exhales slowly. The answer lands less like a shock and more like a piece finally fitting into place. Okay, they say. Julian looks up. Arden studies his face. How long? About a year. That's not a casual amount of time. No. Arden leans back in the chair. For a moment, the room tilts slightly around them. A year. A whole relationship. An entire emotional history sitting somewhere in their missing memories. Why didn't anyone tell me? Arden asks. Julian's answer is immediate. Because it wasn't their place. But it was yours. Not if you weren't ready to hear it. Arden laughs quietly. You all decided that without consulting me. Yes. That's annoying. Probably. Arden studies him again. Were we good together? The question slips out before they can stop it. Julian doesn't respond right away. His gaze softens slightly. Yes, he says. The word lands heavier than Arden expects. Just yes. We worked, Julian says carefully. That's a suspiciously practical description of romance. You know, I'm not big on romance, Julian replies. Arden tilts their head. Right. Aromantic. Julian nods once. But you still dated me. Yes. Why? Julian meets their eyes. Because I loved you. The sentence enters the room quietly. But the impact is immediate. Arden feels the words hit somewhere deep in their chest. Not memory. Not recognition. Just wait. They swallow. Loved, they repeat. Julian nods slowly. Yes. Arden searches his face. There's no embarrassment there. No drama. Just the same steady honesty they've come to expect from him. Past tense, Arden says. Julian considers that. Complicated tense, he replies. Arden exhales through their nose. You stayed in a hospital chair for 3 days, they say. Yes. You reorganize kitchens and fix doors that aren't broken. Yes. You bring me tea before I ask for it. Yes. Arden leans forward again. That doesn't sound very past tense. Julian holds their gaze. For the first time since the conversation began, something vulnerable shows through his calm expression. No, he says quietly. The admission hangs between them. Arden's heart beats faster. So you still. They stop. Julian finishes the thought for them. Care about you, he says. Another careful phrasing. Arden notices. That's not the same sentence, they say. It's the one I'm using, Julian replies. Arden studies him for a long moment. Then they sit back. The room feels different now. The mystery that hovered around them for weeks has finally taken shape. A relationship. A year of shared life. Love. All of it missing from Arden's memory, like an entire chapter torn out of a book. Okay, Arden says softly. Julian raises an eyebrow. Okay. Okay, Arden repeats. They run a hand through their hair. That's a lot to process. I know. You probably spent weeks deciding whether to tell me. Yes. Arden looks at him again. Are you afraid I'll feel obligated? Julian doesn't answer, which is answer enough. Arden exhales slowly. That's not how this works, they say. I know. Julian replies quietly. Do you? Yes. Arden studies him. Then they nod. Good. Another stretch of silence settles between them. But it feels different now. Not tense. Just heavy with new information. Finally, Arden speaks again. There's one more question, they say. Julian nods. Ask it. Arden holds his gaze. Did I love you? Julian doesn't hesitate this time. Yes, he says. The certainty in his voice lands harder than anything else tonight. Arden feels the weight of it. A love they once felt. A year of shared history. A relationship strong enough that everyone in the building still treats it like a living thing. And they can't remember a single moment of it. Arden exhales slowly. Okay, they say again. Julian watches them carefully. Are you all right? Arden considers the question. I don't know, they admit. That's the honest answer. Because the truth sitting in front of them feels both enormous and strangely distant. Like hearing about a life someone else lived inside their body. Arden stands up. The chair scrapes softly against the floor. Thank you for telling me, they say. Julian nods. You asked. Arden walks toward the door. Halfway across the room, they stop. Then they turn back. Julian is still sitting at the table, watching them, patient, careful, the same way he watched them in the hospital when they woke up without a past. Arden feels something twist in their chest. Not love, not yet, but something else. Recognition, of devotion, of history, of the quiet gravity this man has carried around them since the accident. Julian, Arden says. Yeah. They hesitate, then ask the question that has been sitting underneath everything else. What happens now? Julian doesn't answer right away. Instead, he stands slowly. The distance between them is only a few steps. Now, he says gently, you decide who you want to be. The words land softly, but Arden hears the part he doesn't say, and whether that person includes him. Outside, the rain continues falling. Inside the center of the story, everyone else already knew has finally been spoken aloud. And somehow that only makes the future more uncertain than before. Chapter 12. The love Arden cannot feel. The next morning feels wrong. Not because anything is different. Because everything is the same. The apartment is quiet. Morning light leaks through the thin curtains. Somewhere outside, a delivery truck backs up with a slow mechanical beep. Julian is already awake. Of course he is. Arden knows this before even leaving the bedroom. The faint sound of a kettle heating drifts through the hallway. For a moment they stay sitting on the edge of the bed, elbows on their knees, staring at the floor. The conversation from a night before replays in fragments. We dated. A year. Because I loved you. The words don't feel dramatic now. They feel factual, which somehow makes them heavier. Arden presses their palms together slowly. A year of someone else's memories living inside their missing past. A love story they apparently participated in, and absolutely no emotional trace of it. They stand and walk toward the kitchen. Julian looks up as they enter. Morning, he says. His voice sounds exactly the same as always, steady, calm, careful not to push into emotional territory unless invited. Arden studies him. Now that they know, the room feels slightly tilted. The quiet devotion that once looked mysterious suddenly has context. Julian pours hot water into a mug. Tea, he says, sliding it toward Arden automatically. Arden almost laughs. You're still doing that, they say. Doing what? Acting like last night didn't happen. Julian pauses for half a second. Then he sits down across from them. It did happen, he says calmly. And we're just having breakfast? Yes. Arden exhales. You are alarmingly well-adjusted. Practice, Julian says. Arden watches him closely. You told me you loved me, they say. I said I did. That's a technical distinction. It's an accurate one. Arden leans back in the chair. Do you always speak like a contract lawyer about emotions? Only when precision matters. Arden studies him for another moment. And does it matter right now? Julian meets their eyes. Yes. The answer lands quietly between them. Arden looks down at the mug in their hands. Steam curls upward. I keep waiting for something, they admit. What kind of something? Recognition. Julian doesn't interrupt. You told me we were together for a year. Arden continues. That's a long time. Yes. People usually build emotional muscle memory in that time. They do. Arden rubs their forehead. But when I look at you, they stop. Julian waits. There's nothing. Arden finishes quietly. The sentence hangs in the room. Not cruel, just honest. Julian nods once. I know. That simple acceptance hurts more than Arden expects. Does that bother you? Arden asks. Julian considers the question. Of course it does, he says. Arden blinks slightly. The blunt honesty catches them off guard. But Julian continues calmly. It's also not your fault. Arden exhales slowly. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. That doesn't make it easier, Arden says. They hold each other's gaze for a moment. Then Arden sighs. You are extremely stubborn. I've been told that. Probably by me. Several times, Julian says. Arden stands. We should go, they say. Nadia will assume we've been kidnapped if we're late. Julian nods and stands as well. They leave the apartment together. But something about the walk to the center feels different now. Not hostile, not awkward, just uncertain. Two people walking through a history only one of them remembers. The center feels unusually loud that afternoon. Or maybe Arden is simply noticing everything more sharply. Luca is arguing with a delivery driver about where to put a box of donated chairs. Nadia is rearranging paperwork on the front desk with the determination of someone fighting chaos with spreadsheets. Julian disappears almost immediately into the kitchen. Arden lingers near the doorway. Something in their chest feels off balance, like a conversation still unfolding inside their head. You look like someone just explained quantum physics using soup metaphors, Lucas says, appearing beside them. Arden sighs. I had a conversation with Julian this morning. Lucas says. He doesn't ask what about, which means he already knows. Arden notices. Everyone in this building knew we were together. They say. Yes, Luca replies. Except me. Also yes. Arden rubs their forehead. How obvious was it? Luca coincides. Very. Define very. You two reorganized the entire pantry together on a Saturday night, Lucas says. And called it a date. Arden groans. That's mortifying. It was adorable, Luca corrects. Please stop using that word. Never. Arden leans against the desk. He told me I don't owe him anything. They say. Luca nods slowly. That sounds like Julian. It's infuriating, Arden says. Also sounds like Julian. Arden exhales. I wish I remembered something, they admit quietly. Luca's expression softens. You might, he says. And if I don't? Luca shrugs gently. Then you build something new. The same answer everyone keeps giving. Arden looks across the room. Julian stands at the kitchen counter fixing the coffee machine. Completely focused, completely calm, as if his entire emotional life hasn't just been placed in Arden's hands. Arden feels the weight of that realization settle slowly. Julian isn't asking for anything. Not memories, not love, not even hope. He's simply staying. And somehow that makes the absence Arden feels even harder to carry. Because the truth is simple. Julian loved them once. Maybe he still does. And Arden can't feel any of it. Not yet. Not at all. The space where that love used to live remains completely empty. And Arden has no idea if it will ever come back. Chapter 13. The Distance That Grows. For a few days after the conversation, nothing dramatic happens. Which is the problem. No arguments. No confrontations. No emotional collapse. Just distance. It grows quietly between Arden and Julian like something alive. Subtle, careful, almost polite. The center keeps moving around them with the same messy rhythm it always has. Nadia negotiates with funding agencies like a battlefield strategist. Luca organizes a movie night that somehow turns into a 3-hour debate about terrible queer representation in early 2000s television. Life continues, but something between Arden and Julian has shifted. The first sign is small. Julian stops bringing tea before Arden asks. The mug still appears if Arden goes to the kitchen. but the automatic gesture is gone. At first, Arden tells themselves it's coincidence. Then they notice something else. Julian is around less. Not gone, just elsewhere. He fixes things in rooms Arden isn't in. Handles supply deliveries alone. Takes care of quiet maintenance tasks in corners of the building where conversations are unlikely to happen. It's subtle enough that most people probably wouldn't notice. Arden does, because once you know someone has been orbiting your life for years, their absence becomes a gravitational problem. On Tuesday afternoon, Arden finds Luca sitting on the edge of the intake desk eating chips directly from the bag. "Can I ask you something?" Arden says. "That sentence always leads to chaos," Luca replies. "Julian's avoiding me." Luca pauses mid-chip. Avoiding is a strong word. Strategically relocating, Arden says. Luca nods. "Yes, but he's doing." Arden folds their arms. "What?" Luca sighs dramatically and drops the chip bag onto the desk. "Because he's trying not to influence you," he says. "Influence me how?" "Emotionally," Luca replies. "Existentially. Romantically. Pick a category." Arden frowns. "That seems extreme." "Julian doesn't do moderate," Luca says. "He does careful." Arden glances across the room. Julian is in the supply closet repairing a shelf. "Of course he is. He's acting like proximity might manipulate my brain," Arden mutters. "He's acting like he loves you," Lucas says simply. The words land harder than Arden expects. Arden looks down at the desk. "He said I don't owe him anything," they say quietly. That's also true. It feels like he's disappearing. Lucas studies them carefully. "Maybe he thinks it's what you need." Arden exhales slowly. "I didn't ask for that." "No," Luca agrees. "But Julian has a long history of doing what he thinks is best for other people." Arden looks toward the supply closet again. Julian's back is turned. He's adjusting the height of a shelf that probably worked fine before he touched it. Arden feels an unexpected ache in their chest. The distance becomes clearer over the next week. Julian stops sitting at the same table during lunch. Stops walking Arden home after late evenings at the center. Stops hovering quietly in the background of conversations. He's still present, still dependable, still fixing broken doors and organizing supply cabinets and making sure the building doesn't collapse into administrative chaos. But the orbit has changed. He keeps just enough space between them to feel intentional. Arden hates it. It becomes impossible to ignore during the movie night. The center's common room is crowded with volunteers and teenagers sitting cross-legged on the floor. Someone has brought popcorn. Luca has taped a crooked movie night sign to the wall that looks like it was designed during a caffeine emergency. Arden sits on the couch beside Miriam. Julian is across the room near the door. Too far away to speak without raising their voice. Too far away to feel normal. Halfway through the movie, Arden realizes they've stopped paying attention to the screen. Instead, they keep watching Julian. He laughs quietly at one scene, talks to one of the volunteers during another. But every time Arden's gaze drifts his direction, he's careful not to look back. Eventually, Miriam notices. "You're staring," she murmurs. Arden sighs. "He's avoiding me." Miriam glances across the room. "No," she says thoughtfully. "He's protecting you." "From what?" "From feeling obligated," Miriam says gently. Arden rubs their face. Everyone keeps saying that. "Because Julian believes love should be freely chosen," Miriam replies. Arden looks toward the doorway again. "He's making that choice very difficult," they say. Miriam smiles slightly. "Love often is." After the movie ends, people begin drifting out into the night. The room slowly empties. Arden stays behind to help clean up. Julian is already stacking chairs. Of course he is. For several minutes they work in silence. The only sounds are chair legs scraping the floor and the distant hum of traffic outside. Finally, Arden sets down the stack they're carrying. "Julian," they say. He looks up. "Yeah. You're avoiding me." "No," he says calmly. "You are. I'm giving you space." Arden exhales sharply. "I didn't ask for space." Julian studies them. "You didn't ask for memory loss either," he says quietly. The sentence lands harder than Arden expects. They step closer. "This isn't about memory," Arden says. "It is for me." Julian replies. Arden watches his face. The calm expression is back, but now they recognize the effort behind it. You think being around me will pressure me? Arden says. Yes, and you don't want that. No. Arden runs a hand through their hair. You're acting like love is some kind of ethical hazard. Julian almost smiles. Sometimes it is. Julian. Arden. The quiet tension between them stretches again. Finally, Arden says the thing that has been bothering them all week. You don't have to disappear, they say. Julian's expression softens slightly. I'm not disappearing. You're retreating. Maybe. Arden folds their arms. Why? Julian holds her gaze. Because I promised myself something, he says. What? That if you ever had the chance to choose your life freely, Julian says quietly, I wouldn't stand in the way of that. The words settle into the room like gravity. Arden swallows. You think you're standing in the way now? I think my presence makes the decision harder, Julian replies. Arden stares at him. You're assuming there's already a decision to make, they say. Julian doesn't answer. Which is answer enough. Arden sighs. You're impossible, they say. That's also been mentioned before, Julian replies. Arden watches him stack another chair. The distance between them feels larger than the room. You love me, Arden says quietly. Yes. You might still. Julian doesn't respond. And your solution is to remove yourself from the equation, Arden says. My solution is to give you freedom, Julian replies. Arden shakes their head slowly. That's not the same thing. Julian finishes stacking the chairs. Then he turns toward the door. Maybe not, he says. Arden watches him walk away. The space he leaves behind feels larger than it should. Not empty exactly, just different. For the first time since the accident, Arden understands something with painful clarity. Julian isn't stepping back because he doesn't care. He's stepping back because he cares too much. And if the distance keeps growing like this, Arden realizes suddenly, Julian might disappear from their life entirely. Not out of anger, not out of resentment, but out of love. And somehow that possibility hurts more than the missing memories ever did. Chapter 14. Nadia's quiet warning. The distance doesn't break anything. That would almost be easier. Instead, it settles into the center like a subtle shift in weather. Something no one directly mentions, but everyone feels. Julian still arrives early. He still fixes doors, reorganizes supply cabinets, and quietly rescues the coffee machine from mechanical despair twice a week. But he and Arden move around each other now, like people navigating invisible furniture. Polite, careful, never colliding. Arden hates it. By Thursday afternoon, the center is unusually quiet. Luca took the youth group on a field trip to a museum exhibit about queer activism. Half the volunteers are gone for the day. Even the printer has temporarily surrendered to peace. The only sound in the building is the faint buzz of fluorescent lights and Nadia typing in her office. Arden sits at the intake desk, pretending to organize folders they already organized yesterday. Across the room, Julian is repairing the hinge on the supply closet. Again, Arden watches him for a moment. It's almost impressive how thoroughly he has perfected the art of looking busy while avoiding eye contact. The hinge squeaks once. Julian tightens a screw with quiet precision. Arden exhales through their nose. They can't decide if the restraint is noble or infuriating. Probably both. If you stare any harder, Nadia says from behind them, you might actually set something on fire. Arden startles slightly. How long have you been standing there? Long enough, Nadia replies, holding a mug of coffee and watching them with mild amusement. Arden glances back toward the supply closet. Julian has already disappeared down the hallway. He's avoiding me, Arden says. No, Nadia replies calmly. He's giving you space. Arden groans quietly. You too. Yes, Nadia says, sitting down on the edge of the desk. We talk about things here. It's practically our brand. Arden rubs their forehead. Everyone keeps saying he's doing it for my benefit. He believes he is, Nadia says. And you think that's correct? Nadia shrugs slightly. I think Julian has spent most of his life believing love means not getting in the way of someone else's freedom. Arden studies her. That sounds noble. It's also exhausting, Nadia replies. Arden sighs. He's treating me like proximity is emotional manipulation. He's treating you like someone whose choices should be entirely their own, Nadia says. Arden leans back in the chair. But I don't even know what my choices are yet. Exactly, Nadia says. Arden frowns. That doesn't sound like agreement. It isn't, Nadia replies. She studies Arden carefully for a moment. Tell me something, she says. What part of this is actually bothering you? Arden opens their mouth, then pauses, because the honest answer is harder than they expected. He's disappearing, Arden says quietly. Nadia raises an eyebrow. Is he? He used to orbit my life, Arden says. Now he's carefully removing himself from it. Nadia takes a slow sip of her coffee. Julian has always believed love shouldn't trap someone, she says. I'm not trapped, Arden replies. You might feel that way, Nadia says gently. But he doesn't want to risk it. Arden exhales slowly. Everyone keeps talking about freedom like it's fragile. They say, sometimes it is, Nadia replies. Arden watches the hallway where Julian disappeared. I just found out we had an entire relationship, Arden says. And now it feels like it's dissolving before I even understand what it was. Nadia nods slowly. That sounds painful. It's confusing, Arden corrects. Those things often travel together, Nadia says. They sit in silence for a moment. Then Nadia sets her mug down. Arden, she says quietly. Yes. You're making a very common mistake. Arden blinks. That sounds ominous. It's actually simple, Nadia replies. You keep treating memory like identity. Arden frowns. Isn't it? No, Nadia says immediately. The certainty in her voice makes Arden sit up slightly. Memory is a record, Nadia continues. Identity is a pattern. Arden tilts their head. Explain. The person you were before the accident left traces everywhere, Nadia says, gesturing around the center. In the way you organize things. The way people trust you. The way you ask questions. Arden looks around the room. That doesn't feel like me, they say. It doesn't need to feel familiar yet, Nadia replies. Arden folds their arms. Then what does it mean? Nadia leans forward slightly. It means the person you were didn't disappear, she says. You just lost the story that explained them. Arden sits very still. The idea lands somewhere deep. So you're saying I'm still the same person, Arden says slowly. Not exactly, Nadia replies. That's reassuring, Arden mutters. Nadia smiles faintly. You're a continuation, she says. Of someone I can't remember being. Of someone who built this place, Nadia says. Arden looks toward the hallway again. And love Julian, they say quietly. Nadia doesn't answer immediately. Instead, she studies Arden with the thoughtful patience of someone who has watched many complicated emotional situations unfold over decades. Yes, she says eventually. Arden exhales. That part feels impossible, they admit. Why? Because I don't feel it, Arden says. Not even a trace. Nadia nods slowly. That makes sense, she says. Arden blinks. It does. Love isn't a memory, Nadia replies. It's a relationship between two people in the present. The sentence lands harder than Arden expects. So you're saying, I'm saying the past doesn't get to decide your future, Nadia says gently. Arden stares at her. Even if the past loved him. Especially then, Nadia says. The quiet certainty in her voice settles over the room. Arden rubs their hands together slowly. Julian thinks he's protecting my freedom, they say. He probably is, Nadia replies. But what if that freedom includes him? Nadia smiles. Then eventually you'll have to tell him that. Arden exhales slowly. And if it doesn't? Nadia's voice stays calm. Then you'll tell him that too. Arden looks down at the desk. He deserves honesty, they say. Yes, Nadia replies. And so do you. They sit quietly for another moment. Finally, Arden glances back toward the hallway. You think he'll actually leave? They ask. Nadia doesn't pretend not to understand the question. Julian is very good at sacrifice, she says. Arden's chest tightens slightly. That's not comforting. It isn't meant to be, Nadia replies. Arden looks toward the empty doorway again. Somewhere deeper in the building, a door closes softly. The center breathes around them, quiet, patient, full of stories Arden still doesn't fully understand. You know what scares me the most? Arden says quietly. What? Arden hesitates. Not remembering him, they say. Nadia studies them carefully. What scares you, she says gently, is realizing you might have to decide who he is to you all over again. Arden exhales slowly. Because she's right. Memory might have erased the past, but the present still requires a choice. And somewhere down the hallway, Julian Ibarra is quietly preparing to remove himself from Arden's life entirely if that choice isn't him. For the first time since the accident, Arden understands something with frightening clarity. The past may be gone, but the future is approaching faster than they expected. Chapter 15. The story behind the journal. The journal appears again on a Tuesday afternoon. Not dramatically, not like some mystical object returning to the story at the perfect symbolic moment. Kai simply places it on the table between them with the quiet care of someone returning a borrowed library book. Arden stares at it. The cover is familiar now. Soft brown leather, the edges worn smooth from use. They've seen it before, held it before, read pieces of it, but somehow it still feels like a message from a stranger. Kai pulls out a chair across from them. Before you panic, Kai says, no one expects you to suddenly recognize everything in there. That's reassuring, Arden mutters. The community center is mostly empty this afternoon. Nadia is in a grant meeting across town. Luca is trying to convince a local bakery to donate pastries for an upcoming event. The quiet hum of the building wraps around the small kitchen space. Julian is somewhere upstairs fixing something. Of course he is. Arden drags their eyes back to the journal. You wrote in it, Kai says gently. Yes, Arden replies. People keep telling me that. Kai tilts their head. But no one told you why. Arden looks up. No, they admit. Kai taps the cover lightly. Then let's start there. Kai opens the journal. The pages are filled with Arden's handwriting. Sometimes careful, sometimes rushed, sometimes slanted across the paper like the thoughts arrived faster than the pen could keep up. Arden watches the pages turn with a strange sense of detachment, like watching footage of someone else's life. Kai stops near the middle. You started this about 2 years ago, they say. Why? Kai considers the question. Because you were changing, they say. Arden raises an eyebrow. That's vague. It was complicated, Kai replies. They slide the journal closer. You were trying to figure out who you were. Arden lets out a quiet laugh. Apparently that theme has strong narrative consistency. Que smiles faintly. It does. They flip to a page marked with a folded corner. You told me once that memory felt unreliable, Kai says. That sounds accurate, Arden replies dryly. Not like this, Kai says. They tap the page. You said memory rearranges things, edits them, softens them. Arden watches the handwriting on the page. So I wrote things down, they say slowly. Exactly, Kai replies. Arden leans back in a chair. So this was documentation. More like a map, Kai says. Arden frowns slightly. A map of what? Kai meets their eyes. Yourself. Arden runs a finger along the edge of the journal. People keep saying I was transitioning, they say quietly. Kai nods. Yes. Physically, emotionally, existentially, all of the above, Kai replies. Arden exhales. That's a lot to forget. It was a lot to live, Kai says gently. They flip to another page. You were trying to figure out how to exist in the world without forcing yourself into labels that didn't fit. Arden's eyes narrow slightly. Demigender, they say. Kai nods. That word helped for a while. For a while, Arden repeats. Identity is messy, Kai says. Arden snorts. That's becoming painfully obvious. Kai turns the journal around so Arden can read a paragraph. The handwriting is unmistakably theirs. I don't want to become a fixed answer. I want to become a person who can keep changing. Arden stares at the sentence. It doesn't feel familiar, but it feels right. You were scared, Kai says quietly. Arden looks up. Of what? Of becoming someone else's idea of yourself, Kai says. Arden glances back down at the page. That sounds exhausting. It was, Kai says. Kai flips forward a few pages. This is where Julian shows up, they say. Arden stills slightly. Of course he does. Kai watches them carefully. Do you want to hear this part? Arden hesitates. For a moment, they consider saying no. Because every time Julian appears in these stories, it creates a strange, hollow feeling in their chest. But curiosity wins. Yes, Arden says. Kairads. Julian doesn't ask me to be simpler. They pause. He doesn't try to solve me. Another pause. He just stays. Kai closes the journal gently. The silence that follows is heavier than Arden expected. That's annoyingly poetic, Arden says. Kismiles, you wrote it. Still annoying, Arden replies. They look toward the hallway. Somewhere upstairs, a tool clinks against metal. Julian again, always somewhere nearby, fixing things. Did I write about loving him? Arden asks. Kai considers the question. Yes, they say. Arden's chest tightens slightly. A lot. Not the way most people do, Kai says. Meaning, Julian. Not dramatic declarations. Just quiet entries. He stayed again tonight. He made tea when my brain wouldn't slow down. I think safety might be a kind of love. Arden closes the journal. Across the room, the center hums softly in the evening quiet. Upstairs, a door closes. Footsteps move down the hallway. Julian again. Still here. Still staying. For now. Arden stares at the closed journal in their hands. For the first time since waking up without a past, a thought settles slowly in their mind. Maybe the journal wasn't meant to help them remember. Maybe it was meant to help them understand. And understanding might be the first step toward deciding what comes next. Chapter 16, Julian's Decision. The decision begins quietly. Like most of Julian's decisions. No announcement. No dramatic confrontation. Just a slow accumulation of thoughts that eventually settle into something solid. Something inevitable. By the time he recognizes it clearly, the choice has already been made. He just hasn't said it out loud yet. The center is still dark when Julian arrives that morning. The hallway lights flicker on one by one as he moves through the building, unlocking doors, checking windows, turning on a coffee machine that takes exactly 6 minutes to warm up. Routine has always helped him think. So he leans into it. He checks the supply cabinet. He tightens the loose hinge on Nadia's office door. He refills the paper tray in the printer Luca constantly forgets exists. The same quiet maintenance that has filled his mornings for years. But today the building feels different. Not empty, just aware. Like the walls themselves know something is about to change. Julian stands in the kitchen staring at the coffee machine while it gurgles softly to life. Across the room, the long table sits empty. He can picture Arden there without trying. Arden with their elbows on the table. Arden flipping through that journal with a thoughtful frown they get when their brain starts chasing complicated questions. Arden laughing quietly at something Lucas said 5 minutes earlier. The images come easily, because none of those memories disappeared for him. They're all still here. Clear, bright, unavoidable. Julian pours coffee into 2 mugs, then stops. He stares at the second mug for a long moment. Slowly, he pours it back into the pot. By the time the center opens, the decision feels heavier. Not uncertain, just real. Luca arrives first, bursting through the door with the chaotic energy of someone who has already had too much caffeine. Good news, he announces. The bakery agreed to donate pastries if we let them put their logo on the event posters. Julia nods. That seems fair. Also, Luca adds, I may have accidentally volunteered you to help move chairs this weekend. That also seems fair, Julian replies. Luca narrows his eyes slightly. You're being suspiciously agreeable today. Am I? Yes, Luca says, setting his bag on the counter. Normally, you at least pretend to negotiate. Julian shrugs. I'm simplifying things. Luca watches him for a moment. That sentence sounds ominous, he says. Julian doesn't answer, because Luca already understands. The realization spreads slowly across Luca's face. Oh, he says quietly. Julian leans against the counter. It's time, he says. Luca exalis. You're leaving. Julian nods once. Yes. The word lands between them like something fragile. Luca runs a hand through his hair. Julian, it's the right thing, Julian says calmly. For who? For Arden, Julian replies. Luca stares at him. You're making that decision alone. Yes, Julian says. That's incredibly frustrating, Luca mutters. I know. They stand in silence for a moment. Finally, Luca sighs. When? He asks. Soon, Julian says. That's not a real answer. Before the center starts feeling like a cage, Julian replies. Luca's expression softens slightly. You really love them, he says. Julian doesn't respond. He doesn't need to. Arden arrives 20 minutes later. Julian hears their footsteps before he sees them. The sound is instantly recognizable, which feels unfair. Somehow the smallest details about Arden still live permanently in his mind. Arden walks into the common room, holding the journal. Julian notices immediately. Of course he does. Morning, Arden says. Morning, Julian replies. The conversation hangs there. Simple, careful. Arden glances at the coffee pot. You stopped making tea automatically, they say. Julian nods. Yes. That was rude, Arden adds. Julian almost smiles. Probably. Arden sets the journal on the table. Kai explained some things yesterday, they say. About the journal, Julian replies. Yes. Julian nods once. Good. Arden studies him. You're doing it again. Doing what? Acting like you're already halfway out the door. Julian holds their gaze. He doesn't deny it. Arden exhales slowly. I knew it, they mutter. The room feels smaller suddenly. Arden walks closer. You're planning to leave, they say. Not a question. Julian nods once. Yes. The confirmation lands heavily. When? Soon, Julian replies. Arden stares at him. That's vague. It's intentional, Julian says. Arden runs a hand through their hair. You don't get to make that decision alone. It's my decision, Julian replies calmly. It affects me, Arden says. Exactly, Julian says softly. The logic lands like a quiet wall between them. Arden folds their arms. You think leaving will make things easier. I think it will make things clearer, Julian replies. For who? For you. Arden laughs once. Not humor. Frustration. You're unbelievable. Julian nods. That's been mentioned. Arden steps closer again. You think your presence is pressuring me. They say. Yes. You think love is manipulation. No, Julian says quietly. Then what is it? Julian meets their eyes. Choice, he says. The word sits between them. Heavy, patient. And right now, Julian continues, you can't make that choice freely. Arden shakes their head slowly. You're assuming I'll choose you if you stay. No, Julian says. I'm assuming you might feel obligated to. The honesty disarms Arden for a moment. I wouldn't do that, they say. I know, Julian replies. But you might try anyway. Silence spreads through the room. Arden looks down at the journal. I read some of it, they say quietly. Julian nods. Kai showed me the parts about you, Arden adds. Julian looks away briefly. Okay. Arden watches him carefully. The person who wrote those pages loved you. Yes, Julian says. But I'm not that person anymore. Julian doesn't argue. He just nods. Exactly. Arden studies him. That doesn't bother you? Of course it does, Julian replies. Then why leave? Julian exhales slowly. Because loving someone means wanting them to become who they are, he says. Not who you hope they'll return to. The words land gently, but they cut deep. Arden stares at him. And if who I become doesn't include you? Julian shrugs faintly. Then I'll be happy you found your life. Arden's chest tightens. You say that like it wouldn't destroy you. Julian thinks about it. It probably would, he says. The honesty silences the room. For a long moment, neither of them moves. Finally, Arden says quietly, you don't get to disappear without telling me. Julian nods. I know. So, when were you planning to say goodbye? Julian meets their eyes. Soon, he repeats. Arden exhales slowly. I hate that word. I know, Julian says. Another quiet moment passes. Then Arden picks up the journal. The person who wrote this believed love shouldn't trap people. They say. Yes, Julian replies. You believe that too. Yes. Arden studies him carefully. But you're wrong about one thing. Julian raises an eyebrow slightly. What's that? Arden holds his gaze. Leaving doesn't guarantee freedom, they say. Julian doesn't respond. Sometimes, Arden continues quietly, it just guarantees regret. The words settle into the air between them. Julian feels something shift in his chest. But the decision is already made. Or at least, he thinks it is. For now. That evening, Julian stays late after everyone else leaves. The center is silent. He walks through the building one last time, checking doors, turning off lights, running his hand along the familiar walls. This place has been the center of his life for years, and somehow it all leads back to the same person. Arden. Julian pauses in the common room. The long table sits empty. The journal is gone. Arden must have taken it home. He stands there for a long moment, then finally whispers the thing he hasn't said out loud all day. I hope you find the life you want, he murmurs into the quiet room, because loving someone means letting them choose, even if that choice eventually leads them away from you. Julian turns off the lights, and the center falls into darkness. The decision has been made. Now all that remains is the goodbye. Chapter 17, The Memory Fracture. The first memory doesn't feel like a memory. It feels like a mistake. Arden is standing in the community center kitchen late in the afternoon, staring at the coffee machine like it has personally offended them. Which, to be fair, it might have. The machine wheezes once, then again, then stops. You've got to be kidding me, Arden mutters. Behind them, Luca is mid-sentence explaining something about a fundraising spreadsheet catastrophe when the machine makes one final choking sound and dies. Silence fills the kitchen. Luca sighs dramatically. This building is cursed, he says. Arden reaches for the machine instinctively. Their fingers slide under the side panel. Twist the latch. Lift the casing. They freeze, because they don't remember learning how to do that. But their hands clearly do. Oh, Luca says. Arden blinks. What? You just fixed that without thinking, Luca replies. Arden looks down. The machine is open. Wires exposed. Filter tray removed. Their hands move again, cleaning a valve, reconnecting a tube, tapping the metal casing once before sealing it again. The coffee machine hums back to life. Arden stares at it. Did I know how to do that before? They ask slowly. Luca raises an eyebrow. You fixed that thing so many times we considered naming it after you. Arden exhales quietly. Right. The moment passes. Mostly. But something lingers. A faint pressure in the back of their mind, like a door that almost opened. The second memory is stranger. It arrives an hour later. Arden is carrying a stack of donated books down the hallway when they step on the loose tile near the entrance. The tile shifts slightly under their foot, and suddenly, a sound. Laughter. Not present laughter. Old laughter. Echoing through the hallway. Arden stops walking. The books nearly slip from their arms. For half a second, the hallway looks different. The same walls, but brighter. Full of people. Julian leaning against the doorway. Someone, Arden, complaining about the tile. One day, someone's going to break their neck on that thing, a voice says. Julian's voice answers. Then we'll finally fix it. The memory vanishes. The hallway returns to normal. Empty. Quiet. Arden grips the books tighter. Their heart is beating faster. Okay, they whisper to themselves. That was new. The third fracture happens that night. Arden is home, sitting on the couch with the journal open in their lap. Rain taps softly against the windows. The building smells faintly of old wood and laundry detergent. They turn a page. Another entry about Julian. He stayed again tonight. Arden sighs softly. You really like that man, they murmur. The words leave their mouth, and something shifts. Suddenly the room feels crowded. A memory pushes forward. Not clear, not complete, just a moment. The center kitchen, late at night. Julian sitting across the table. Arden talking too fast about something complicated, identity probably. Hands moving while they speak. Julian listening, not interrupting, not fixing, just staying. And then Arden saying something they can't quite hear. But Julian laughing quietly. Soft, warm. The memory snaps away. Arden sits up suddenly. Their heart is pounding. Okay, they say out loud. That was definitely a memory. They call Kai, because Kai is the only person who seems emotionally prepared for whatever this situation has become. Kai answers on the second ring. Please tell me you didn't accidentally start a small fire. They say. No, Arden replays. Good. I think I just remembered something. Silence on the other end. Then Kai says carefully. What kind of something? Arden rubs their forehead. Fragments, they say. The hallway. The kitchen. Julian laughing. Okay, slowly. Okay, that's your response? Arden asks. That's the response of someone who expected this eventually, Kai says. Arden leans back on the couch. It didn't feel like a movie flashback, they say. It felt like pressure. Memory usually does, Kai replies. Arden closes the journal. What if more come back? They might, Kai says. What if they don't? That's also possible. Arden sighs. You are extremely calm about this. Because the important part isn't whether you remember, Kai says. It's what you do with the person you are now. Arden glances at the journal again. Julian is leaving. Kai doesn't sound surprised. Yes, they say quietly. Did everyone know except me? Mostly. Arden groans. Fantastic. Kai's voice softens slightly. Do you want him to go? Arden doesn't answer immediately, because the truth is getting harder to ignore. The memories may be incomplete, but the idea of Julian leaving feels increasingly unbearable. And now those fragments, those tiny flashes of the person Arden used to be, are making the feeling stronger. I don't know, Arden admits. Then you should probably figure that out quickly, Kai says. Why? Because Julian has a long history of leaving quietly when he thinks it's the right thing to do. The words land like a warning. Later that night, Arden lies in bed staring at the ceiling. Sleep refuses to cooperate. Their brain keeps replaying the fragments. The hallway, the kitchen, Julian's laugh. They close their eyes, and suddenly another memory flickers. Not clear, but closer. Julian standing in the rain outside the center. Arden holding 2 cups of terrible vending machine coffee. You stayed, Arden says. Julian shrugs slightly. You asked. The memory dissolves again. Arden sits upright in bed. Their heart is racing. Okay, they whisper into the dark room. Something is definitely happening. The fractures are small, barely enough to understand, but they're growing. And somewhere across the city, Julian Ibarra is quietly preparing to leave Arden's life. What neither of them knows yet is that the past is starting to fight its way back, one memory at a time. Chapter 18, The Night Everything Returns. The night begins normally, which is how most life-altering moments begin. Arden closes the community center a little after 10. The last volunteer left half an hour earlier. Luca waved dramatically from the sidewalk while promising to emotionally recover from spreadsheets. Nadia had already gone home. The building is quiet now, settling into the familiar nighttime creaks of old pipes and aging floorboards. Arden moves through the rooms automatically. Lights off, windows checked, front desk locked. Routine has become comforting lately, because routine doesn't ask difficult questions. Routine doesn't demand answers about love or memory or the terrifying possibility that Julian might disappear from their life before they understand why that matters so much. Arden turns off the final hallway light. Only the common room remains illuminated. They step inside and stop. Julian is there. He stands near the long table with a cardboard box at his feet. Arden immediately recognizes the box. It holds Julian's things. The mug he always uses. The small toolkit he keeps in the kitchen drawer. A stack of folders he maintains for the center's maintenance schedule. The sight of it hits Arden like a physical blow. You're leaving tonight, Arden says quietly. Julian looks up. For a moment, something vulnerable flashes across his face. Then the calm expression returns. I was going to wait until morning, he says. Arden walks further into the room. That sounds like a polite lie. Julian doesn't deny it. The silence between them stretches. Outside, rain begins tapping softly against the windows. Arden notices the sound immediately, because something about rain suddenly feels familiar. Too familiar. You were just going to disappear, Arden says. Julian shakes his head. I was going to leave a note. That's worse, Arden replies. Julian almost smiles. Probably. Arden looks down at the box. You packed everything, they say. Not everything, Julian says. Just the things that are mine. You fixed half this building, Arden mutters. The building will survive, Julian replies. The words settle into the quiet room. Arden feels something rising in their chest. Fear. Frustration. Something deeper they still can't quite name. You don't get to leave like this, Arden says. Julian studies them. Why not? The question is calm, but lands like a challenge. Arden opens their mouth, and suddenly the world tilts. The rain grows louder against the windows, and the sound pulls something loose inside Arden's mind. A memory pushes forward. The same room, years earlier, rain hammering the glass. Julian sitting at the table with 2 terrible cups of vending machine coffee. Arden pacing across the floor, talking too fast. I don't know what I'm supposed to be, Arden hears himself say in the memory. Julian shrugs slightly. You don't have to be a finished answer, he replies. The memory snaps away. Arden grabs the edge of the table to steady themselves. Julian steps forward immediately. Arden, wait, Arden whispers. Another memory crashes through. The hallway. Arden standing on a chair, trying to change a broken light bulb. Julian holding the ladder steady. You know, this is technically a safety violation, Julian says. The entire building is a safety violation, Arden replies. Julian laughs. The sound echoes through the memory like sunlight. Arden gasps. More memories follow. Faster. The kitchen late at night. Julian making tea while Arden writes in the journal. Luca loudly insisting that soup counts as dinner. Julian walking beside Arden in the rain. Julian sitting beside a hospital bed. Julian saying quietly, I'm here. The flood grows stronger. Arden grips the table harder. Their entire past begins rushing back at once. Every conversation, every quiet moment, every argument and apology and long late-night discussion about identity and belonging and the terrifying relief of being understood. And at the center of all of it, Julian, always Julian, standing nearby, listening, staying. The realization lands like a dropped glass. Arden loved him, not abstractly, not theoretically, fully, deeply. The love fills their chest again with painful clarity. And suddenly the past 2 months make sense in the most devastating way possible. Julian never stopped loving them, even when Arden couldn't remember why. Arden sinks into the nearest chair, breathing hard. Julian kneels beside them immediately. Talk to me, he says softly. Arden looks at him, really looks, and this time the recognition hits like lightning. Every memory, every shared year, every quiet moment that built the life they lost. Julian, Arden whispers. Their voice shakes. I remember. Julian freezes. What? Arden presses a hand against their chest. Everything, they say. The room falls silent. Rain taps steadily against the windows. Julian studies their face like someone staring at a miracle they don't quite trust yet. All of it, he asks quietly. Arden nods slowly. The support group. The pantry reorganization date. The time you fix the coffee machine with a spoon. A small, stunned laugh escapes Julian. That was a good spoon, he says. Arden laughs weakly. Then the laughter fades, because another realization settles in. The memories are clear, perfect, but something feels different, like reading a diary written by someone you used to be. The love is there, but it feels distant, muted. Arden looks at Julian carefully. I remember loving you, they say. The words land softly, but the room changes. Julian understands immediately. But you don't know if you still do, he finishes. Arden swallows. No. Silence spreads between them. Heavy. Honest. Julian nods slowly. Okay, he says. Arden stares at him. That's it. What else should I say? Julian replies gently. Arden gestures helplessly at the box on the floor. You were about to leave. Yes. And now? Julian thinks for a moment, then shrugs slightly. That depends on you. The answer feels terrifying. Arden looks at him, at the person who stayed through everything. The person who loved them, even when the past disappeared. And suddenly the thought of him walking out the door feels unbearable. Not because of the memories, but because of who he is right now. Wait, Arden says. Julian pauses. Yes. Arden stands slowly. The rain outside begins to soften. I remember falling in love with you, Arden says. Julian watches them carefully. But I don't know if that feeling belongs to the person I am now. Julian nods. That's fair. Arden takes a step closer. But I do know something. What's that? Arden meets his eyes. I don't want you to leave. The confession sits between them. Fragile. Hopeful. Julian studies their face for a long moment. Are you sure? He asks. Arden shakes their head. No. A small laugh escapes Julian. That's honest. Arden exhales slowly. But maybe love isn't something you recover, they say. Maybe it's something you build again. The rain outside finally stops. And for the first time since the accident, the future between them feels open instead of broken. Julian glances down at the box on the floor, then back at Arden. Okay, he says quietly. And this time, he doesn't leave. Chapter 19. The Conversation After Memory. The rain stops sometime after midnight. Neither of them notices when. Arden and Julian are still standing in the common room of the community center, the box of Julian's belongings sitting on the floor between them like an unanswered question. The lights hum quietly overhead. Outside, the city has settled into the soft, distant noise of late-night traffic. Inside the building, the silence feels enormous. Arden sits down slowly at the long table. Their hands are still trembling slightly, not from fear, from the overwhelming weight of memory pressing against the present. Julian remains standing for a moment before pulling out the chair across from him. He sits, careful, like sudden movement might break something fragile. How much do you remember? He asks quietly. Arden exhales. Everything, they say. They close their eyes briefly. The support group. The night Luca tried to cook dinner and nearly started a grease fire. The argument about soup being a meal. Julian smiles faintly. It is a meal, he says. It is not, Arden replies automatically. The familiar rhythm of the argument lands between them. Both of them recognize it. And for a moment the room feels like it used to. Then the moment passes. Arden opens their eyes. I remember the first time we stayed late at the center, they say. Julian nods slowly. You were reorganizing the pantry. You called it a date, Julian replies. You brought tea, Arden says. Julian looks down at the table. You were nervous, he says. About what? Julian shrugs slightly. About everything, he says. Your identity, your future, whether you were allowed to want things. Arden nods slowly. I remember that, they whisper. The memories are sharp now. Clear. The years they spent slowly building trust with each other. The quiet evenings in the kitchen. The conversations that stretched past midnight because neither of them wanted to stop. And the moment everything changed. The night I told you I loved you, Arden says softly. Julian stills. Yes, he replies. Arden laughs once. I was terrified, they say. You were, Julian agrees. You thought I was going to leave, Arden says. Julian meets their eyes. I always thought that was possible. Arden studies his face. The memories fill in every detail. How careful Julian was with them. How he never pushed, never demanded, never asked for more than Arden was ready to give. You loved me before I understood myself, Arden says. Yes, Julian replies. And you stayed when I was a disaster. That's a strong word, Julian says. It's accurate, Arden says. The honesty settles into the room. Then Arden leans forward slightly. But something is wrong, they say. Julian doesn't react immediately. I know, he says. Arden blinks. You do. Julian nods. You remember the love, he says. But you don't feel it the same way. Arden exhales slowly. Exactly. They press a hand against their chest. The memories are there. The history is there. But the feeling is distant. Julian nods. Like reading a book about someone you used to be, he says. Arden looks at him. Yes. The room grows quiet again. Julian studies the grain of the table for a moment. Then he says the thing he's clearly been preparing himself to say for weeks. That's okay, he says. Arden frowns. You keep saying that. Because it's true, Julian replies. You're allowed to change. Arden leans back in the chair. Even if that change means I don't love you anymore. Julian's expression softens. Yes, he says. The answer lands gently. But hurts. Arden watches him carefully. You're remarkably calm about something that should be emotionally catastrophic, they say. Julian considers that. I've had time to prepare, he replies. For what? For the possibility that the person you became after the accident wouldn't choose me. Arden's chest tightens. You were planning to leave? They say. Yes. Because you thought I deserved freedom. Julian nods. Yes. Arden rubs their face slowly. You really are exhausting, they say. Julian smiles faintly. I've been told. Another quiet stretch passes between them. Finally, Arden says the thing that has been sitting in the center of their thoughts since the memories returned. I remember loving you, they say, but the reason I asked you to stay tonight. They hesitate. Julian waits. Was it because of the past? Arden finishes. Julian studies them carefully. Then why? Arden exhales. Because the person you are right now matters to me, they say. The words are quiet, but they change the room. You stayed when I had nothing, Arden continues. You protected my freedom even when it hurt you. You never once tried to convince me to love you again. Julian's eyes soften slightly. That wasn't my decision to make, he says. Arden nods. Exactly. They lean forward. So here's the problem, Arden says. Julian raises an eyebrow. That sounds ominous. I don't know if the person I am now loves you, Arden says. The honesty hangs in the air. Julian nods slowly. Okay, but Arden continues, I do know that the idea of you leaving feels unbearable. Julian looks up. Something flickers across his face. Hope. Careful. Fragile. Those are not the same thing, Julian says. I know, Arden replies. That's why this is complicated. They glance at the box on the floor. You were ready to walk away, Arden says. Yes. And you would have done it, Arden adds. If you thought it was the right thing. Julian nods. Yes. Arden studies him for a long moment. Then they say quietly, I don't want you to go. The sentence lands between them. Julian doesn't respond immediately. When he finally speaks, his voice is careful. Why? Arden exhales slowly. Because I think I want to find out if I can fall in love with you again. The room goes completely still. Julian stares at them. Again, he repeats softly, Arden nods. Not because the past says I should, they say, but because the person sitting across from me right now is someone I want in my life. Julian lets out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Are you sure? He asks. Arden shakes their head. Not even slightly, they say. A small laugh escapes Julian. That's honest. Arden smiles faintly. It's the best I can offer. Julian glances down at the box of his belongings. Then back at Arden. For a long moment, he doesn't say anything. Finally, he reaches down, closes the lid of the box, and pushes it gently under the table. Okay, he says quietly. Arden exhales in relief. The future still feels uncertain. Messy, complicated, but for the first time since the accident, the choice between them belongs to the present, not the past, and that feels like the beginning of something new. Chapter 20, The Choice. The rain returns 3 nights later. Not violently, just a steady, quiet fall that taps against the windows of the community center like someone politely asking to come inside. Arden notices it immediately, because rain now carries too many memories. They stand in the kitchen, staring at the kettle while it heats, the soft metallic rattle filling the otherwise empty room. It's late. Most of the lights in the building are off. Luca left an hour ago after a dramatic monologue about pastry donations. Nadia went home with the weary determination of someone who has survived another day of grant applications. The center is quiet now. Just Arden. And Julian. Julian is sitting at the long table in the common room, flipping through a stack of maintenance reports he absolutely does not need to read tonight. Arden knows this. Julian knows this. But neither of them has pointed it out. The kettle whistles softly. Arden pours 2 cups of tea, then pauses. The gesture feels strangely important. Not automatic anymore. Chosen. They carry the cups into the common room and place one in front of Julian. Julian looks up. Tea. Arden says. Thank you. Julian replies. He studies the cup for a moment before wrapping his hands around it. The quiet familiarity of the moment settles over the room. 3 days ago, Arden asked for the chance to rebuild something between them. Since then, nothing dramatic has happened. No declarations. No sudden transformations. Just small moments. Share meals. Late-night conversations. Careful laughter that sometimes comes easier than either of them expects. It isn't the relationship they used to have, but it isn't nothing either. Julian takes a sip of tea. You've been thinking, he says. Arden raises an eyebrow. Is it that obvious? You reorganized the sugar packets by color earlier, Julian replies. Arden winces. That was a mistake. It was a sign, Julian says gently. Arden sits down across from him. You're very observant, they say. Occupational hazard. Silence settles between them again. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. Arden taps their fingers lightly against the table. Do you remember the first night we stayed late here? They ask. Julian nods slowly. You insisted the pantry needed to be reorganized, he says. It did, Arden replies. You alphabetized the spices. They were chaotic. Julian smiles faintly. You called it a date. I remember, Arden says quietly. The memory no longer feels distant. Not fully alive either, but closer, like a photograph slowly regaining color. Arden studies Julian's face across the table. I keep expecting the feeling to come back all at once, they admit. Julian tilts his head slightly. Does it? No, Arden says. They rest their elbows on the table. But something else is happening. What kind of something? Arden thinks about it. I like being here with you, they say. Right now. Julian doesn't speak immediately. He watches them carefully. That sounds like a good start, he says. Arden exhales softly. I think the past version of me fell in love slowly, they say. Over a lot of conversations. Julian nods. We talked a lot. About everything, Arden says. Identity, community, whether soup counts as dinner. It does, Julian says. It absolutely does not. The familiar argument lands between them again. This time Arden notices something. The warmth that follows the exchange feels natural. Unforced. They lean back slightly. Maybe love isn't a memory, Arden says slowly. Maybe it's a pattern you build with someone. Julian considers that. That sounds like something you would write in a journal, he says. Arden glances toward the couch. The journal is sitting there, waiting. They stand up and retrieve it. The leather cover feels warm in their hands. Arden returns to the table and opens it to the final blank page. Julian watches quietly. You used to write here a lot, he says. I remember, Arden replies. They hold the pen above the page. For a moment, nothing happens. Then slowly, carefully, they begin to write. I remembered everything today. Arden pauses. The words look strange on the page. Not wrong, just incomplete. They continue writing. But memory isn't the same thing as becoming the person who lived it. Julian watches the pen move. The rain continues tapping gently against the windows. Arden glances up briefly. You're being very quiet, they say. I'm observant, Julian replies. That's suspicious. Probably. Arden smiles faintly and writes again. The past tells me I loved him. They stop. The sentence sits on the page. Heavy. True, but incomplete. Arden exhales slowly, then writes the next line. But the present is asking a different question. Julian shifts slightly in his chair. What question is that, he asks. Arden looks up. Whether I can love you again, they say. The honesty lands softly. Julian nods. That's a good question. Arden studies his face. The same steady presence. The same careful patience that once made them feel safe enough to build a life here. Maybe the love they had before is gone. Or maybe it simply belongs to a different version of them. But the person sitting across the table right now still matters. Still feels important. Arden returns to the journal and writes the final line. Maybe love isn't something you recover. Maybe it's something you build again. They close the journal. The quiet sound echoes softly in the room. Julian watches them carefully. What did you write, he asks. Arden slides the journal toward him. The beginning, they say. Julian reads the page slowly. When he finishes, he closes the journal gently. That sounds like you, he says. Arden stands. They walk around the table until the distance between them disappears. For a moment, neither of them speaks. Then Arden says quietly, I don't know how this story ends yet. Julian nods. Neither do I. Arden studies his face. Would you be willing, they ask softly, to find out with me? The question hangs in the air. Julian doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he stands. Now, they're eye level, close enough to see every careful emotion moving across each other's faces. Finally, Julian says, yes. The word is simple, but changes everything. Outside, the rain slows to a gentle mist. Inside the community center, the future waits patiently. Arden reaches for the kettle again. We're going to need more tea, they say. Julian smiles. And this time, they begin again.